The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Harden Ridge's only general store, and Evelyn Mercer was the last passenger to climb down. Not because she wanted to be last, because the driver had looked at her twice, calculated her weight against his axle, and told her to wait until everyone else got off first. She stood there in the mud wearing a dress 2 years out of fashion and boots held together with wire she'd twisted herself during the 3-week journey west. Her trunk, cracked leather, rusted corners, one hinge held on with hope, sat beside her in the dirt. Inside that trunk, 4 dresses, 2 petticoats, a set of cooking knives her mother had given her, and a glass jar wrapped in cloth that contained her great-grandmother's sourdough starter, kept alive through 3 generations in one very desperate escape from Massachusetts. The town looked exactly like the kind of place people ended up when every other option had failed them. Wooden buildings leaned against each other like drunks after closing time. The main street was less a street and more a suggestion of where a street might exist if anyone cared enough to build one properly. Horses stood tied to posts, swishing flies with their tails, looking generally unimpressed with their surroundings. 2 men sat outside the saloon watching her with the kind of blank curiosity people reserve for strange weather or minor accidents. Evelyn picked up her trunk. It was heavy. Everything she owned was heavy. Behind her, the stagecoach driver climbed back onto his seat. "You sure about this, ma'am?" "Sure about what?" "Staying here." He gestured vaguely at the town, at her, at the general situation. "Place like this ain't kind to women on their own." "Wasn't asking for kind," Evelyn said. "Just needed somewhere far." The driver shrugged and snapped his reins. The horses pulled forward, and within 30 seconds the stagecoach disappeared around the bend, leaving Evelyn alone in the middle of a town that had already decided she didn't belong there. She was 35 years old, too old to be starting over, too tired to care what anyone thought about it. A woman emerged from the general store, thin, sharp-featured, wearing an apron that had seen better decades. She looked Evelyn up and down with the efficient assessment of someone pricing livestock. "You the cook?" Evelyn blinked. "I'm looking for work cooking, yes. Ranch outside town needs someone. Caleb Thorne's place. He came through yesterday asking if anyone knew a woman willing to work isolated." The woman's eyes traveled across Evelyn's body again, lingering on her width, her rough hands, the exhaustion pressed into every line of her face. Didn't specify what kind of woman. It wasn't a compliment. Evelyn had spent enough years being looked at that way to recognize contempt when it arrived wearing politeness. Back in Boston, Victor's friends had perfected that exact expression. The women at his parties had smiled with their mouths while their eyes calculated her worth and found it lacking. Too heavy, too plain, too clearly out of place among people who'd inherited their value instead of earning it. She'd learned to smile back. "How far is the ranch?" 8 miles northwest, Blackthorn Ranch. Follow the creek until you see the broken windmill, then head toward the ridge." The woman paused. "You really want to go out there alone?" "I really want work." "Thorne's difficult. Lost his wife 2 years back. Got a daughter who don't speak. Last 3 cooks didn't last a month." "What happened to them?" "Nothing dramatic. Just decided the isolation wasn't worth the wages." The woman's expression shifted into something almost sympathetic. "Almost. You seem like you've had a hard road already. Might want to think twice before adding to it." Evelyn adjusted her grip on the trunk. Her shoulders ached. Her back ached. Everything ached. She'd been traveling for 3 weeks, sleeping in stagecoach stations and once in a barn after the coach broke an axle outside some town whose name she'd already forgotten. Before that, she'd spent 2 months working in a Kansas City boarding house, saving every penny while checking over her shoulder every time a well-dressed man walked past. Before that didn't matter anymore. "Which direction is northwest?" she asked. The woman pointed. Evelyn started walking. The creek was easy to find. It was the only water moving through the landscape that wasn't trying to drown everything in mud. Evelyn followed it for over an hour, her trunk growing heavier with each step. The broken windmill appeared exactly where promised, skeletal against the sky, its blades hanging at angles that suggested violence more than weather. Beyond it, the land rose toward a ridge covered in sparse grass and scattered rocks. A fence ran along the property line, or what used to be a fence before half the posts had rotted through and the wire had gone slack. Cattle grazed in the distance, looking thin and vaguely accusatory. The ranch house sat in the shadow of the ridge, a two-story structure that might have been impressive 20 years earlier, but now just looked tired. The paint had surrendered to the wind. One shutter hung crooked. The porch sagged in the middle like a swayback horse. Evelyn stopped at the gate. She could turn around, walk back to town, find different work, something easier, somewhere less isolated, somewhere that didn't look quite so much like a place people went to disappear. Then she thought about the stagecoach driver's expression, the woman at the general store, the men outside the saloon, all of them looking at her and seeing someone temporary, someone who wouldn't last. She opened the gate. The front door stood slightly ajar. Evelyn knocked anyway, because her mother had raised her to have manners even when the world didn't bother returning them. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. "Mr. Thorne," she called, "I'm here about the cook position." Silence pressed back at her. She could hear wind moving through the broken windmill, the distant complaint of cattle, the creak of the porch beneath her feet. Nothing else. Evelyn pushed the door open. The inside of the house hit her like a physical thing. Dust hung in the air thick enough to taste. The furniture was there, table, chairs, a sofa that had seen better upholstery, but everything existed under a layer of neglect so thick it felt intentional. Dishes were piled in the dry sink. The floor was tracked with mud and what might have been dried blood from butchering. In the corner, a mouse skittered across the baseboard and disappeared into a hole no one had bothered patching. This wasn't just a house that needed cleaning. This was a house that had given up. Evelyn set her trunk down carefully, walked to the kitchen, and stood in the doorway trying to calculate how much work she was looking at. The stove was crusted with old grease. The counter was sticky with something unidentifiable. Every pot, every pan, every surface was coated in the residue of meals cooked by people who'd stopped caring whether anything tasted good or was even properly safe to eat. She rolled up her sleeves. "The hell are you doing?" Evelyn turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, sun-weathered, somewhere in his late 30s. His shirt was clean but wrinkled. His face was harder than necessary. His eyes were the kind of exhausted that came from sleeping badly for years, not weeks. "I'm here about the cook position," Evelyn said. "Didn't ask you to start working. Wasn't asking permission." She turned back to the stove. "You got soap anywhere in this house, or did the last person take it with them? Under the sink might be dried out. Most things are." Evelyn found the soap. It was, in fact, dried out, and began working it into something usable. "When did you last eat something that wasn't burned or boiled past recognition?" Caleb Thorne crossed his arms. "You always this rude to potential employers? You always let potential employees walk into an unlocked house and start cleaning before you've even interviewed them?" Something almost like amusement flickered across his face. Almost. Then it disappeared back into the general exhaustion. "You came from town?" "Arrived on the afternoon stage." "Anyone tell you about this place?" "Woman at the general store said you were difficult. Your daughter doesn't speak, and the last 3 cooks didn't last a month." Evelyn hauled water from the pump into a large pot and set it on the stove. She didn't mention the house looked like someone tried to punish it. "That woman talks too much." "Maybe. Or maybe she talks exactly the right amount and you're not used to hearing true things." Evelyn started scraping at the stove with a flat piece of wood. Layers of grease came away like sediment. "Your daughter home?" Caleb's entire body went rigid. "Why?" "Because if I'm cooking here, I should know who I'm cooking for." "Maisie doesn't eat much. Most children don't when the food tastes like punishment." Evelyn glanced back at him. "I'm not asking to raise her. I'm asking to feed her properly. There a problem with that?" For a long moment, Caleb didn't respond. He stood in the doorway looking at this heavy, blunt, exhausted woman who'd walked into his house without invitation and started cleaning his kitchen without permission, and something in his expression shifted. Not softening exactly, more like the recognition of someone too tired to keep fighting every single battle. "Maisie stays in her room most days," he said finally. "Doesn't talk to strangers, doesn't talk to anyone." "She talked to you?" "No." "When did she stop?" "When her mother died." Caleb's voice flattened out completely. 2 years, 3 months, 8 days ago. Doctor said grief does different things to different people. Maisie's way was silence. Evelyn kept scrubbing. "That the doctor's words or yours?" "Does it matter?" "Might. Caleb turned to leave, then stopped. You got a name? Evelyn Mercer. Where you from? The question landed harder than he'd probably intended. Evelyn's hand slowed against the stove just for a second before resuming their work. East. That's not specific. No, Evelyn agreed. It's not. Caleb studied her back, the set of her shoulders, the careful way she didn't turn around, the tension that had suddenly appeared in the line of her spine. You running from something? He asked. Everyone out here is running from something. Evelyn scraped harder at the stove. Question is whether you care enough to ask why. Should I? Not if you want a cook who shows up on time and doesn't steal. Evelyn finally turned around. Her face was flushed from the work, her hair was escaping its pins, and her expression was absolutely clear. But if you're asking whether I'm dangerous, answer's no. I'm just tired of being found. Caleb understood that, maybe better than he wanted to. Wages are $20 a month plus room and board, he said. You sleep in the back room off the kitchen. You cook 3 meals a day for me, Maisie, and whatever ranch hands are working. You clean the kitchen and the common areas. You don't touch Maisie's room, you don't go in my office, you don't ask questions about things that aren't your business. And if Maisie comes to the kitchen, then you let her be. Don't try to make her talk, don't try to fix her. Last cook tried that. Lasted 2 weeks. Evelyn nodded slowly. Anything else? Keep the door locked at night. We're 8 miles from town. Help doesn't come fast. Wasn't planning on needing help. Nobody ever is, a chat. The back room was small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a chair, and a trunk. But it was clean, and it had a door that locked from the inside, which was more than Evelyn had expected. She unpacked carefully, hanging her dresses on the 3 nails someone had hammered into the wall, arranging her cooking knives on the small shelf, placing her great-grandmother's sourdough starter on the windowsill where it could catch morning light. The starter looked back at her from inside its glass jar, bubbling gently, alive in the way only wild yeast and stubborn women understood. We made it, Evelyn whispered to it. Now we just have to stay. She spent the rest of that first day excavating the kitchen from under its layers of neglect. The work was brutal. Her hands split open from lye soap. Her back screamed from bending over the stove. She found things growing in corners that probably qualified as new forms of life. But slowly, inch by stubborn inch, the kitchen began remembering what it used to be. By evening, the stove was clean. The counter was scrubbed. The dishes were washed and stacked. The floor had been swept, mopped, and swept again. Evelyn's entire body ached with the deep, honest pain of work that mattered. Caleb appeared in the doorway as the sun started setting. He looked at the kitchen, then at Evelyn, then back at the kitchen like he was trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he remembered. You didn't have to do all this today, he said. Couldn't cook in it the way it was. I've been cooking in it. That's different. How? Evelyn straightened up, one hand pressed against the small of her back. You were surviving. I'm staying. Those aren't the same thing. Something shifted behind Caleb's eyes. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. The understanding that maybe this woman wasn't like the others who'd passed through. Temporary, uncomfortable, counting days until they could leave. Maisie smelled the cleaning, he said. Came out of her room, stood at the top of the stairs for a while. She say anything? No, but she stayed longer than usual. Evelyn nodded. That's something. Is it? Yes. What? The next morning, Evelyn woke before dawn and fed her sourdough starter before feeding herself. She mixed flour and water into the existing culture, watching it bubble and rise, responding to her attention the way living things did when they were cared for consistently. Then she started bread. Not the quick, angry bread people made when they were in a hurry. Real bread. The kind that took time and attention and actual belief that something good could come from simple ingredients and patience. She mixed flour, water, salt, and starter. She kneaded until her arms burned. She let the dough rise slowly in the warmth near the stove, then shaped it into loaves that looked like they'd been made by someone who remembered what bread was supposed to be. By the time Caleb came downstairs, the entire house smelled like a memory most people didn't know they'd forgotten. He stopped at the kitchen doorway. What is that? Bread. I know it's bread. We haven't had bread that smelled like that since... He stopped himself. Since your wife died? Evelyn asked quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened. Yeah. I'm not trying to replace her. Didn't say you were. No, but you were thinking it. Evelyn pulled the loaves from the oven and set them on the counter to cool. I'm just making bread. That's all this is. That's not all it is. Maybe not. Evelyn met his eyes. But it's not a threat either. Just bread. You can eat it or not. That's your choice. Caleb stood there for a long moment, looking at the woman who'd arrived yesterday carrying almost nothing and was now filling his house with something he'd forgotten existed. Finally, he picked up one of the loaves, tore off a piece, and ate it. His expression didn't change, but he ate another piece, then another. From the top of the stairs came a soft sound. Both of them looked up. Maisie stood on the landing in a nightgown that had been washed so many times the fabric was nearly transparent. She was small for 9 years old, thin in the way children got when they stopped eating consistently, stopped growing right, stopped occupying the space they were supposed to fill. Her hair hung loose around her face. Her eyes were huge and dark and ancient. She was looking at the bread. Morning, Maisie, Evelyn said, calm as glass. You hungry? Maisie didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there looking at the bread like it was something impossible. Fresh loaf just came out, Evelyn continued, talking the way someone might talk to a nervous animal. Easy, no pressure, no expectation. Still warm. I could slice some for you if you wanted. Maisie's gaze shifted to Evelyn. For a moment, they just looked at each other. This broken child and this broken woman, both of them trying to figure out if the other was safe. Then Maisie turned and went back to her room. Caleb started to speak, but Evelyn held up one hand. Don't, she said quietly. That was more than yesterday. She didn't say anything. No. But she stood there longer. She made eye contact. She let herself want something. Evelyn wrapped one of the loaves in cloth and set it aside. Tomorrow she might come closer. Day after that she might stay. But only if we don't push. How do you know? Evelyn looked at him with an expression that was too old for her face. Because I know what it's like to be that scared. Days passed, then weeks. Evelyn fell into a rhythm that was brutal and satisfying in equal measure. Up before dawn. Feed the starter. Make bread. Cook breakfast for Caleb and the 2 ranch hands who showed up most mornings, Boyd Ramirez, the foreman, and a younger man named Tommy, who barely spoke and ate like he was afraid the food would disappear. She learned the shape of the work. The way Caleb liked his coffee dark and bitter. The way Boyd always asked for seconds but never thirds, like he didn't want to seem greedy. The way Tommy snuck food into his pockets when he thought no one was looking. She learned the sounds of the house, the way the floorboards creaked differently depending on who was walking on them. The way the wind found every crack and gap and turned them into small, sad songs. The way Maisie's door opened and closed at irregular intervals, like the girl was testing whether the world was safe enough to join yet. Every morning, Evelyn baked bread. Every morning, she set aside one loaf and left it on the counter where Maisie could see it from the stairs. Every morning, Maisie stood on the landing for a little longer. You're wasting bread, Caleb said one morning. How am I wasting it if she's watching it? She's not eating it. Yet. Evelyn shaped another loaf. She's not eating it yet. This is what I'm talking about. You're trying to fix hers. I'm making bread. That's all I'm doing. Evelyn looked at him. If the smell of bread makes your daughter remember that good things still exist, that's not me fixing her. That's just bread being bread. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You're stubborn. Yes. It's annoying. Also, yes. The last cook, but I'm not the last cook. Evelyn cut him off, her voice sharper than she'd intended. The last cook was trying to leave. I'm trying to stay. There's a difference. Why? Caleb asked. Why here? Why this place? Evelyn's hands stilled in the dough. For a moment, she considered telling him the truth. About Victor, about Boston, about the money, the control, the years of being told she was worthless until she started believing it. About running until her feet bled and her money ran out, and she ended up here because it was far enough that maybe, finally, no one would find her. Instead, she said, because this place needs someone stubborn enough to stay. On the 6th week, something changed. Evelyn was pulling bread from the oven when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Soft, hesitant. The kind of steps someone made when they weren't entirely sure they had permission to exist in the space they were entering. Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stood there in the morning light wearing a dress that was too small and boots that had clearly been her mother's once. Her hair was pulled back in a braid someone, Caleb probably, had attempted with varying degrees of success. Her face was solemn and ancient and terrified. Evelyn didn't react, didn't smile too wide, didn't rush forward, didn't do any of the things well-meaning people did that made scared children run. She just took the bread from the oven and set it on the counter. "Morning," she said quietly. Maisie didn't respond. "Fresh bread," Evelyn continued, talking the way she'd been talking for 6 weeks to a child who never answered. "Might need a few minutes to cool, but I could slice you a piece if you wanted." Maisie took one step into the kitchen, then another. She moved like someone expecting the floor to disappear beneath her feet, ready to bolt at any second. Evelyn kept her hands busy with the bread, slicing, buttering, moving slow and predictable. Finally, Maisie reached the counter. She stood there for a moment, then carefully, so carefully, reached out and touched the loaf. It was still warm. Her eyes went wide. "First touch is always the best," Evelyn said softly. "Before you eat it, before you cut it, when it's just warm and whole and smells like everything good that still exists in the world." Maisie looked up at her, those huge dark eyes searching for something Evelyn understood too well. Permission, safety, proof that this moment was real and wouldn't be taken away the second she trusted it. Evelyn cut a thick slice and handed it to her. Maisie took it, bit into it, chewed slowly. Then she did something she hadn't done in 2 years, 3 months, and approximately 26 days. She smiled. It was small. It was brief. But it was real. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest that she'd thought was permanently closed. Not joy, exactly. Something rawer than that. The recognition that maybe broken things could still do good, that maybe survival wasn't the end of the story, that maybe showing up every day and making bread for a grieving child who couldn't speak was the kind of work that mattered more than anything she'd done in Boston, wearing expensive dresses and pretending she belonged among people who measured worth in money and pedigree. "Good?" Evelyn asked. Maisie nodded. "Want another piece?" Another nod. Evelyn cut a second slice. Maisie took it and went back upstairs without a word. But the next morning, she came back. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. Always silent, always careful, but present, occupying space in the kitchen like she was slowly remembering she was allowed to exist there. Caleb watched this happen with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. Not quite gratitude. Not quite fear. Something suspended between hope and the certainty that hope was dangerous. One evening, after Maisie had gone to bed and the kitchen was clean and the house was quiet, he found Evelyn on the back porch looking at the stars. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "You know for what." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm not doing anything special, just showing up. That's more than most people manage." Caleb sat down on the step beside her. Not close, but closer than he'd allowed himself to be before. "She's different now, since you came." "She's the same, just less buried." "That's not the same thing." "Maybe not." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, the kind two people shared when they'd both been broken enough to recognize it in each other and were too tired to pretend otherwise. "You ever gonna tell me what you're running from?" Caleb asked. Evelyn's whole body tensed. "No." "Figured." He looked at her profile in the starlight. "But if whatever it is catches up to you, you should know. This place protects its own." "I'm not yours to protect." "You're here. That makes you ours." Caleb stood up. "Whether you like it or not." He went inside, leaving Evelyn alone with the stars and the realization that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she'd stopped just surviving. She'd started belonging. And that was more terrifying than anything Victor had ever done to her. 3 months into her time at Blackthorn Ranch, Evelyn realized she'd made a critical mistake. She'd let herself feel safe. Safety was dangerous. Safety made you careless. Safety made you forget that the past didn't actually stay in the past just because you ran far enough west. She was kneading dough at the kitchen counter when the feeling hit her, that cold, specific dread that lived in her spine and only woke up when something was wrong. She looked up sharply, flour-dusted hands frozen mid-motion, and scanned the empty kitchen like the threat might materialize between the stove and the dry sink. Nothing. Just morning light through dirty windows and the sound of Maisie humming upstairs. Humming. The girl was humming now. Had been for 2 weeks. Small tuneless sounds that meant she was remembering how to be a child again. Evelyn forced herself to breathe and went back to the dough. She was being paranoid. That's what 3 years of marriage to Victor Hale did to a person. Turned normal moments into potential ambushes, made you see threats in empty rooms and familiar footsteps. She was safe here. 8 miles from town, middle of nowhere, Wyoming. Victor didn't even know she'd left Kansas City, much less tracked her this far west. She'd been careful, changed her name twice, paid cash for everything, never stayed anywhere long enough to be remembered. The dough pushed back against her palms, resistant and alive. "You're making angry bread again," Boyd said from the doorway. Evelyn jumped, then tried to cover it by punching down the dough harder than necessary. Wasn't aware bread had moods. It does when you make it. Boyd crossed to the coffee pot and poured himself a cup without asking, which meant he'd been working here long enough to stop treating the kitchen like foreign territory. He was maybe 40, built like someone who'd spent his whole life doing actual work instead of just talking about it, with a scar across his left eyebrow that he'd never explained and never would. "Something bothering you?" "No." That's not an answer that inspires confidence. Good thing I'm not trying to inspire confidence. Evelyn shaped the dough into loaves with more force than required. "Just trying to make breakfast." Boyd studied her over the rim of his cup. He had that annoying quality some people possessed, where they could look at you and see past whatever performance you were giving. Caleb had it too. It was one of the more exhausting things about working here. "Caleb told me you don't talk about where you came from," Boyd said finally. "That's accurate." "Also said if I pushed, you'd probably leave." "Also accurate." "So I'm not pushing." Boyd set his cup down. "Just saying, if something's coming for you, better to know about it before it arrives than after." Evelyn's hands stopped moving. She kept her eyes on the dough, but her whole body had gone rigid in that way that told anyone paying attention that they'd just stepped on something that hurt. "Nothing's coming," she said quietly. "You sure?" "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "But I'm here anyway. That count for something?" Boyd nodded slowly. "Counts for plenty." He headed for the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, you belong here. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't change that." He left before she could argue. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen with her hands buried in dough, and that cold dread still sitting in her spine, whispering that safety was temporary and belonging was something other people got to keep. She finished the bread anyway. Because that's what you did. You kept going even when you were scared, especially when you were scared. By the time Caleb came in for breakfast, she'd packed the fear back into whatever locked room she kept it in and was frying eggs like nothing had happened. "Maisie's coming down," he said, pouring coffee. "Actually asked for breakfast. Used words and everything." Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. "What'd she say?" "Is there bread?" Caleb's voice was rough with something that might have been pride or might have been grief that his daughter was finally speaking again and his wife wasn't here to see it. That was it, just those 3 words, but she said them. "That's good. It's more than good. It's—" He stopped himself, shook his head. "You did that." "I made bread." She decided to talk. "Those aren't the same thing." Close enough. Maisie appeared in the doorway wearing a dress that actually fit her now. Evelyn had taken in the seams and let out the hem and somehow made the faded fabric look almost intentional. The girl's hair was braided neatly, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there 3 months ago. She looked at the bread cooling on the counter, then at Evelyn, then back at the bread. "Morning," Evelyn said, calm as glass. "Hungry?" Maisie nodded, then seemed to catch herself. "Yes, please." 2 more words. 5 total now. It felt like watching something frozen slowly remember how to melt. Evelyn cut a thick slice and buttered it while Maisie climbed into her chair at the table. The girl ate carefully, like the bread might disappear if she wasn't paying attention. Caleb watched his daughter with an expression that was equal parts relief and terror. The look of a man who'd spent 2 years believing his child was gone and was now afraid to trust that she might be coming back. "School starts next month," he said quietly. Maisie's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide and panicked. "Just thinking about it," Caleb added quickly. "Not saying you have to go, just thinking." "She should go," Evelyn said. Both of them looked at her like she'd suggested burning the house down. "She's 9, Evelyn continued, meeting Caleb's gaze. "She needs other children, needs to learn things besides cooking and ranch work." "She's not ready," Caleb said flatly. "Maybe. Or maybe you're not ready to let her try. That's not fair." "No, but it's true." They stared at each other across the kitchen table while Maisie looked back and forth between them, her bread forgotten, that panicked expression getting stronger. Evelyn softened her voice. "I'm not saying throw her into town school tomorrow. I'm saying start thinking about what comes next, because this," she gestured around the kitchen, "this is good. This is healing. But it's not a whole life." Caleb's jaw was so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. "You've been here 3 months. Yes. You don't get to make decisions about my daughter." "I'm not making decisions. I'm making breakfast and stating an opinion." Evelyn looked at Maisie, whose eyes were filling with tears now. "And I'm scaring her," which wasn't the goal. She crossed to Maisie and crouched down beside her chair. "Hey, nobody's making you do anything you don't want to do. Your father's just worried because he loves you, and I'm pushy because I'm pushy. That's all this is, okay?" Maisie nodded, but the tears spilled over anyway. "You want more bread?" Another nod. Evelyn cut another slice, and Maisie took it with shaking hands. The girl ate mechanically, not tasting it now, just putting food in her mouth because the adults expected her to. Caleb stood abruptly and walked out. The back door slammed. Evelyn closed her eyes and counted to 10. Then 20. Then gave up on counting and just accepted that she'd overstepped in a way that might cost her this job in this place and the first sense of belonging she'd felt in years. "He's not mad at you," Maisie whispered. Evelyn's eyes flew open. "What?" "Papa, he's not mad at you." Maisie was looking at her bread, not at Evelyn, but she was speaking. Full sentences. Clear and certain. "He's mad at himself. Because he knows you're right." The girl stood up, took her bread, and went back upstairs, leaving Evelyn kneeling on the kitchen floor, wondering when exactly she'd gone from cook to something more complicated than that. She found Caleb 20 minutes later at the broken windmill, attacking the rusted bolts with a wrench like the machinery had personally offended him. "Need help?" she asked. "No. I'm going to help anyway." "Why?" "Because I was out of line, and I feel bad, and fixing things makes me feel less bad." Evelyn picked up a second wrench. "Which bolt?" Caleb pointed without looking at her. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the squeak of rusted metal and the wind moving through the broken blades above them. Finally, "She's talking to you." "I noticed. More than she talks to me." "That's not true. She talks to you plenty. You're just not always listening." "I'm listening." "You're hearing. That's different." Evelyn grunted as a bolt finally gave way. "You hear her ask for bread. You don't listen to why she's asking. And why is she asking? Because bread is safe. Bread is predictable. Bread means someone's staying." Evelyn met his eyes. "You want her to go to school because you think it'll make her normal again. She doesn't want to go because she's not ready to leave the one place that feels safe. You're both right. You're both wrong. And you're both too stubborn to admit it." Caleb stared at her. "You're the most irritating person I've ever met." "I've been told that before." "By who?" The question landed like a physical blow. Evelyn's hands froze on the wrench. By Victor. By his mother. By every person at every party who looked at her and saw something that didn't fit. By the servants who whispered about her weight. By the women who smiled with their mouths and sneered with their eyes. "By people who don't matter anymore," she said finally. "They matter to you. That's different." Caleb set down his wrench. "You're right about Maisie, about school, about me being scared to let her try." He looked up at the broken windmill. "After Sarah died, I stopped knowing how to be his father. Just knew how to keep her alive. Feed her, clothe her, make sure she didn't hurt herself. But actually raising her? Teaching her how to live instead of just survive? I don't know how to do that anymore. So you learn. What if I can't? Then you fail, and you try again. That's how it works. Evelyn picked up another bolt. Nobody knows how to do this stuff perfectly. We just show up and do our best and hope it's enough. Is it enough? Sometimes. Maybe. I don't know. She paused. But showing up is more than most people manage, so that counts for something. They went back to work on the windmill. By noon, they'd freed 6 bolts and were covered in rust and sweat, and had somehow become something closer to friends than employer and employee. When they walked back to the house, Maisie was waiting on the porch. I want to try, she said quietly. Caleb stopped. Try what? School. If you think I should go, I want to try. Evelyn saw the way Caleb's whole face changed, the fear and pride and love crashing together in an expression too complicated for words. He crossed to his daughter and knelt down in front of her. You sure? He asked. Maisie nodded. But only if Miss Evelyn comes with me, the first day, so it's not so scary. Both of them looked at Evelyn. I'm a cook, Evelyn said. Not a teacher. I don't need a teacher, Maisie said. I need someone who stays. The words hit harder than they should have. Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest, that same raw thing that opened up every time this broken child trusted her with something that mattered. Okay, she said. First day. I'll come. Maisie smiled, that small, brief, genuine smile that still felt like a miracle every time it appeared, and went back inside. Caleb stood slowly. Thank you. She's the one doing the hard part. So are you. I'm just making bread and occasionally saying things that make you want to fire me. Haven't fired you yet. Give it time. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, something that looked almost like warmth. I don't think I will. The moment stretched between them, too long to be casual, too charged to be simple gratitude. Evelyn felt her face heat and looked away first. I should start dinner, she said. It's barely noon. Then I should start lunch. She escaped back into the kitchen before he could say anything else that made her feel things she wasn't ready to feel. But that night, lying in her small room with the door locked and her sourdough starter bubbling gently on the windowsill, Evelyn let herself think about what was happening here. How somewhere between making bread and fixing a broken child, she'd stopped being just a cook and started being part of something bigger than survival. She'd started mattering, and that terrified her more than Victor ever had, because mattering meant having something to lose, and Evelyn had spent 3 years building a life where she had nothing anyone could take from her. Now she had a job, a room, a child who trusted her, a man who looked at her like she was more than the sum of her failures. She had things that mattered, which meant she had things Victor could destroy. The thought kept her awake until dawn. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed about Boston, about parties where she didn't fit, about Victor's smile that never reached his eyes, about the moment she'd finally gathered enough courage to leave and discovered all her money was gone, her bank accounts closed, every legal document showing that everything she thought was hers had always belonged to him. She woke with her heart pounding and the bitter taste of fear in her mouth. The starter was still bubbling on the windowsill, still alive, still growing. Evelyn fed it carefully, then started the day's bread like nothing was wrong. Because that's what you did. You kept going even when you were terrified. You made bread and showed up and hoped it was enough to keep the darkness at bay one more day. But the darkness was patient, and 3 weeks later, it arrived in the form of a well-dressed man asking questions in town about a woman matching Evelyn's description. Boyd heard about it first. He came back from a supply run looking grim and found Evelyn in the kitchen rolling out pastry dough. "Someone's asking about you," he said without preamble. Evelyn's hands stopped moving. "What?" Man at the general store came through yesterday. Well-dressed, Eastern accent. Said he was looking for a woman, heavy-set, mid-30s, good cook, probably using a different name. Boyd's voice was carefully neutral. Mentioned she might be running from family troubles. Offered money for information. The room tilted. Evelyn gripped the counter to steady herself. "How much money?" $50. That was more than most people in Harden Ridge made in 3 months. That was enough money to make people remember details they'd normally forget. Enough to make them look closer at the new cook who'd shown up alone and never talked about where she came from. Did anyone tell him anything? Her voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. Not yet, but he's staying in town, asking around. And $50 is $50. Evelyn nodded slowly. Her mind was racing, calculating distances and timelines, and how long it would take Victor's associate to piece together that the woman at Blackthorn Ranch matched the description. A day? 2? She should leave now. Tonight. Before anyone connected the dots. Before Victor found her. Before everything she'd built here collapsed. I need to go, she said. Where? Anywhere. Doesn't matter. Like hell it doesn't. Boyd moved to block the doorway. You run now, you're running forever. That what you want? It's what keeps me alive. That's not living. That's just not dying. There's a difference. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. Evelyn looked at him. This man who'd somehow become something like a friend, who was standing in her way because he thought he was helping, who had no idea what Victor was capable of when someone defied him. My husband, she said finally, is a very wealthy man, very connected, very good at making people disappear when they inconvenience him. I left him 3 years ago. He's been hunting me ever since, not because he loves me, because I'm his property, and he doesn't let go of his property. Her voice cracked. If he finds me, he'll drag me back to Boston. He'll lock me somewhere I can't leave, and he'll make sure I never run again. Boyd was quiet for a long moment. Caleb needs to know. No. Evelyn, no, I'm leaving tonight. I'll be gone before anyone wakes up, and you can tell them I was just passing through. Tell them I was never planning to stay. Tell them whatever you want, just don't tell them the truth. She pulled off her apron with shaking hands. They can't know. If they know, they'll try to help. And if they try to help, they'll get hurt. That's how this works. Victor hurts anyone who gets in his way. So you're just going to disappear? I'm good at disappearing. What about Maisie? The name hit like a fist. Evelyn closed her eyes. She'll be fine. No, she won't. Boyd's voice went hard. That girl just started talking again. Just started trusting people again. You leave now. You're teaching her the same lesson everyone else taught her, that people you love don't stay. Better she learns it from me leaving than from me getting her hurt. That's coward talk. Evelyn's eyes snapped open. Excuse me? You heard me. You're so scared of what might happen that you're willing to guarantee something worse happens. Boyd crossed his arms. That man in town doesn't know you're here yet. Might never figure it out. But you run now, Maisie loses someone else. Caleb loses the first person who's made this place feel like a home in years. And you lose the first place you've belonged since you started running. I don't belong here. The hell you don't. They stared at each other across the kitchen table. Evelyn's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Because Boyd was right. She was terrified. Not of Victor finding her. She'd been terrified of that for 3 years. She was terrified of staying, of mattering, of letting these people care about her enough that when Victor inevitably destroyed everything, they'd hurt too. I can't, she whispered. You can. You just don't want to. What's the difference? One's about ability. One's about choice. Boyd pulled out a chair and sat down. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay. We're going to figure out who this man is and what he knows. And if he gets close, we'll handle it. You don't know Victor. You don't know what he can do. Maybe not, but I know what we can do. And I know Caleb won't let anyone hurt you without going through him first. Neither will I. That's what I'm afraid of. Boyd shook his head. You spent 3 years being afraid. Maybe it's time you try something else. Like what? Like standing still long enough to let people fight for you. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why staying was dangerous and running was smart, and she'd survived this long by never trusting anyone to protect her. But she was tired. She was so tired of running. Okay, she said finally. I'll stay. For now. But if that man finds out I'm here, then we'll deal with it. You say that like it's simple. It is simple. Doesn't mean it's easy. Boyd stood up. I'm telling Caleb. Boyd, he needs to know what we're dealing with. You want to hide, that's your choice. But you don't get to keep secrets that might get people hurt. He left before she could argue. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen with her ruined pastry dough and her shaking hands, and the certain knowledge that she'd just made a mistake that might cost everyone everything. But she didn't run. For the first time in 3 years, when fear told her to disappear, she stayed, even though it terrified her, even though she wasn't sure it was the right choice. She stayed. That evening, Caleb found her in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. Maisie had already gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the sound of dishes being washed. "Boyd told me," he said. Evelyn's hand stilled in the dishwater. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "When I figured out how." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "This husband. He's the reason you came here?" "Part of it." "He hurt you?" The question was asked in that careful, controlled voice men used when they were trying very hard not to let their anger show. Evelyn appreciated the effort, even though she could see it straining at the edges. "Not the way you're thinking," she said. "Victor never hit me. Didn't need to. He had other ways of making sure I knew my place." She dried her hands and turned to face him. "Money, legal papers, social pressure. He made sure I had nothing that wasn't his, no accounts, no property, no friends who weren't his friends first. By the time I realized what he'd done, I was completely trapped." "How'd you get out?" "Badly. Desperately. I stole money from his safe, bought a train ticket, and ran. Changed my name twice, worked anywhere that would take me. Kept moving until I ended up here." She met his eyes. "I wasn't planning to stay this long. Wasn't planning to get attached, but then there was Maisie, and the kitchen, and—" She trailed off. "And you stopped running," Caleb finished. "I stopped running," she agreed, which was probably stupid. Probably. He was quiet for a moment. "This man in town. You think he'll find you?" "Eventually. Victor doesn't give up. If this associate doesn't find me, he'll send someone else. And someone else after that. Until either I'm found or I'm dead." "Or he is." Evelyn laughed, bitter and sharp. "Victor doesn't die. Men like him don't. They just keep accumulating power until they're untouchable." "Nobody's untouchable." "You don't know him." "No, but I know this land, and out here money doesn't protect you the way it does back east. Out here, you're just another person who bleeds." Caleb's voice was hard and certain. "He comes for you. He'll have to go through me. I don't want you fighting my battles." "Too bad. You're part of this ranch now. That makes your battles our battles." "That's not how it works." "That's exactly how it works." Caleb pushed off the doorframe. "You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. I know that's probably terrifying for you, but you're not alone." He left before she could argue. Evelyn stood in the empty kitchen with tears burning behind her eyes, and the realization that she'd just been given something she'd never had before. People who would fight for her. Not because they had to. Not because they were paid. But because somewhere along the way she'd become someone worth fighting for. It was the most terrifying gift anyone had ever given her. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat by her window watching the stars and feeding her sourdough starter and trying to figure out how you were supposed to protect people who were determined to protect you. She didn't have an answer by morning. But when dawn broke and she started the day's bread, Maisie came down earlier than usual and stood in the doorway watching. "You're not leaving, are you?" the girl asked quietly. Evelyn turned. "Why would you think that?" Papa and Boyd were talking. They thought I was asleep. Maisie's eyes were too old for her face. "Someone's looking for you, someone bad. And people always leave when something bad is coming." "Not always." "Mama did." The words hung in the kitchen air like smoke. Evelyn set down the dough and crossed to where Maisie stood. She knelt down so they were eye level. "Your mama didn't leave," she said gently. "Your mama died. Those aren't the same thing." "It feels the same." "I know. But dying isn't choosing, and leaving is." Evelyn took the girl's hands. "I'm not leaving, not because nothing bad is coming, something might be, but because I'm tired of running from bad things, and because you matter more than being safe." "Really?" "Really?" Maisie threw her arms around Evelyn's neck and held on like she was drowning. Evelyn held her back, feeling the girl's small body shake with sobs that had been waiting 2 years to come out. They stayed like that until Maisie's tears ran out and the bread was ready to go in the oven. Then they made breakfast together, and Maisie talked the whole time about her mother, about being scared, about wanting to go to school, but being afraid everyone would think she was broken. And Evelyn listened and answered honestly, and tried not to think about the man in town who was asking questions. Tried not to think about Victor. Tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. She just made bread and talked to a grieving child and hoped that somehow, impossibly, staying would turn out to be the right choice after all. The man in town turned out to be nobody important, just a private investigator from Denver hired by someone's angry uncle to track down a runaway wife, and the description didn't match Evelyn closely enough to matter. Boyd brought back the news 3 days later, and everyone pretended to relax even though the fear had already done its work, reminding all of them that safety was temporary and the past was patient. But that false alarm did something unexpected. It made Evelyn realize she needed money. Real money. The kind that could buy a train ticket if running became necessary again, or better yet, the kind that could hire a lawyer if Victor ever found her and tried dragging her back through legal channels. She had $17 saved from her wages. At this rate, she'd have enough to maybe run as far as Montana in about 8 months, assuming nothing went wrong and she never needed to buy anything except a ticket. It wasn't enough. Not even close. So she did what desperate people had been doing since the invention of flour. She started baking for money. The first loaves went to town with Boyd on his weekly supply run. She wrapped them in clean cloth and told him to sell them for whatever people would pay. He came back with empty cloths and $3, which seemed impossible until he explained that apparently nobody in Harden Ridge had tasted decent bread since the last baker died of cholera 4 years ago. "They're asking for more," Boyd said, counting coins onto the kitchen table. "Said they'd pay in advance if you can guarantee supply." Evelyn stared at the money like it might disappear. "How much more?" "Much as you can make. There's a mining camp 20 miles north that gets supplied through town. Those men are eating hardtack and jerky and whatever doesn't kill them. Fresh bread would sell faster than whiskey. I can't make enough bread for a mining camp, not with everything else I'm doing here." "So you do less here?" "That's not how employment works." Boyd leaned back in his chair. "Talk to Caleb. Man's not stupid. He can see you're trying to build something." She did talk to Caleb later that evening, after Maisie had gone to bed and the house was quiet. He was in his office going through account books with an expression that suggested the numbers weren't improving through staring. "I want to start a business," Evelyn said from the doorway. Caleb looked up. "What kind of business?" "Bread. Selling it in town into the mining camps. Boyd says there's demand." "There's always demand for things people can't get." He closed the account book. "You planning to do this while still working here?" "If you'll let me use the kitchen during off hours. Early morning, late evening, times when I'm not cooking for the ranch." She crossed her arms. "I'd pay rent on the oven. Fair rate." "Don't want your rent." "Then what do you want?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, his eyes traveling across her face like he was trying to read something written there in invisible ink. "Why do you need money so badly?" "Because money means choices, and I haven't had choices in a long time." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." They looked at each other across the cluttered desk. Finally, Caleb nodded. "Use the kitchen. No rent. But you keep cooking for us during regular hours, and if it interferes with ranch work, we renegotiate." "That's too generous." "Consider it payment for making my daughter talk again." He opened the account book again, clearly done with the conversation. "Also, whatever money you make, keep it somewhere safe. Somewhere that's not obvious." "Why?" "Because people talk. And when they hear about a woman making money, they start asking questions. Your husband's people come looking again. You don't want them finding a trail that leads straight here." Evelyn felt something warm and complicated settle in her chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just make sure you know what you're doing." She didn't really, but she started anyway because that's what you did when you were desperate and determined in equal measure. The first week she made 20 loaves and sold 18. The second week she made 30 and sold all of them by Tuesday. By the third week she was waking at 3 in the morning to start dough and going to bed after midnight with her hands split open and flour so deep under her fingernails it might as well have been permanent. Maisie started helping. The girl couldn't knead dough properly yet. Her arms weren't strong enough. But she could shape rolls and brush tops with egg wash and count out change when people came to the ranch to buy directly instead of waiting for Boyd's deliveries. "You're working too hard," Caleb said one morning, finding Evelyn half asleep over breakfast. "I'm working exactly hard enough." "You're going to collapse." "Not yet, I'm not." "Evelyn, I need this." She looked at him with eyes that were bloodshot from exhaustion and determination. I need to know I can survive without depending on anyone. Even you. Especially you. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been dependent on a man before, and it nearly destroyed me. So I need this money. I need to know that if everything falls apart, I have options. Her voice cracked. I need to know I can run if I have to. Caleb's face did something complicated. You're not going to have to run. You don't know that. I know I won't let anyone take you. You can't promise that. Watch me. The certainty in his voice was almost painful. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could actually protect her from Victor's reach. But she'd learned the hard way that promises were just words, and words disappeared the moment they became inconvenient. So she kept baking, kept working herself past exhaustion, kept saving every penny like her life depended on it, because it probably did. By the end of the second month, she had $83 hidden in a tin under her bed. By the end of the third month, she'd expanded to selling at the train station and had hired 2 women from town, a widow named Martha and a young mother named Clara whose husband had disappeared, to help with the baking. The kitchen was never empty anymore. There was always someone mixing dough or shaping loaves or scrubbing pans. The house smelled like yeast and hope, and the kind of industry that came from desperate women who'd discovered they could make money without needing a man's permission. Maisie thrived in the chaos. She started talking more, laughing more, bossing the other women around like she'd been born to run a bakery empire. She still had bad days when the silence came back and she disappeared into her room and wouldn't come out. But those days were getting rarer. Caleb watched all of this happen with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or concern. Or something more complicated that neither of them knew how to name. Then Silas Barrett arrived and everything got worse. He came on a Thursday in early autumn, riding a black horse that looked too expensive for ranch country and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people in Harden Ridge made in a year. He was maybe 50, well-fed in that way wealthy men got when they never missed a meal, with sharp eyes and a smile that looked practiced in mirrors. Boyd met him at the gate. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window while pretending to wash dishes. "Help you?" Boyd asked, not quite polite. "Here to see Caleb Thorne," Barrett's voice carried across the yard, educated, confident, used to being obeyed. "Business matter." "What kind of business?" "The kind that's between me and Thorne." Boyd stood his ground. "Mr. Thorne's busy. You can state your business to me or come back another time." Barrett's smile sharpened. "I'm not accustomed to dealing with hired help." "Then you're going to have a hard time out here because that's mostly what we've got." Boyd crossed his arms. "State your business or leave." For a moment it looked like Barrett might try forcing his way past. Then Caleb appeared from the barn, walking with that deliberate slowness that meant he was already angry and trying not to show it. "I'm Thorne," he said. "You are?" "Silas Barrett. I represent Western Valley Railroad and Land Company." Barrett pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I'm here about a debt your family owes my company. Substantial debt, actually. Dating back to your grandfather's time." Caleb took the envelope but didn't open it. "My family doesn't owe anybody anything. These documents suggest otherwise." Barrett gestured at the envelope. "Original loan from 1847, never fully repaid. With interest compounded over 40 years, we're looking at approximately $8,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. $8,000 was more money than the ranch would make in 5 years. More money than most people saw in their entire lives. Caleb opened the envelope and scanned the documents. His face went very still. "This is fraud," he said quietly. "It's business." Barrett's smile never wavered. "Your family borrowed money, failed to repay it. Now the debt comes due. Simple as that. There's nothing simple about claiming a debt that was paid off before I was born. Then you'll have records proving payment. I'm sure we can settle this in court." Barrett pulled out a pocket watch and checked it with theatrical precision. Of course, court proceedings take time, during which the property would be held in receivable status. You'd need to cease operations, vacate the premises. Like hell. Or, Barrett continued like Caleb hadn't spoken, you could sign the property over to Western Valley now. We'd forgive the debt entirely. You'd walk away free and clear, fresh start somewhere else. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations, and now it can be the foundation of something greater. Progress, Mr. Thorne. The railroad's coming through this valley, whether you like it or not. You can be part of that progress, or you can be crushed by it. Barrett tucked his watch away. I'll give you 2 weeks to decide. After that, we file with the territorial court. He turned his expensive horse and rode away, leaving Caleb standing in the yard with papers in his hand and an expression like he'd just been gut-punched. Evelyn met him at the porch. What did he want? Everything. Caleb's voice was hollow. He wants everything. That night, they gathered in the kitchen. Caleb, Boyd, Evelyn, and Tommy, who'd been working the ranch long enough to be considered family. Caleb spread the documents across the table while Evelyn made coffee. Nobody wanted, but everyone drank anyway, because it gave their hands something to do. This can't be real, Boyd said, scanning the papers. Your grandfather paid off every debt before he died. I remember your father talking about it. So do I. Caleb ran his hands through his hair. But these documents look legal. Official seals, signatures, the whole thing. They're forged, Evelyn said. Everyone looked at her. Has to be, she continued, her voice gaining certainty as she worked through it. Barrett's not collecting an old debt. He's creating a new one. Railroad wants the land, sees you're vulnerable, manufactures a legal claim that'll hold up just long enough to force you out. You sound like you've seen this before, Caleb said. I've seen men like Barrett before. Men who use law and money and paperwork to take things that don't belong to them. Her mouth twisted. My husband did it all the time, called it business, called it protecting his interests. Really, it was just stealing with better vocabulary. So how do we fight it? Tommy asked. We prove it's fraud. Evelyn pulled the documents closer, studying them with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. These papers claim a loan from 1847. That means there should be original records, bank documents, payment schedules, receipts. She looked up. Where would your grandfather have kept records? Gone through everything after he died, Caleb said. Never found anything about a loan, because he paid it off, which means the payment records exist somewhere. Evelyn tapped the signature on the loan document. This says the loan came from Harden Valley Bank. That bank still operating? Barely. About to be bought out by some outfit from Denver. Then that's where we look. Original records should still be in their archives. Boyd shook his head. Bank's not going to let us go digging through their files, especially not for something that makes them look complicit in fraud. So we don't ask permission, Evelyn said. The kitchen went very quiet. You're talking about breaking into a bank, Caleb said slowly. I'm talking about getting evidence before it disappears, which it will, the moment Barrett realizes we're on to him. Evelyn met his eyes. You want to fight this legally? You need proof. And proof doesn't wait for permission. This is insane. Yes. We could go to prison. Also, yes. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not one that works fast enough. Evelyn's voice was hard and certain. Barrett gave you 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, he files with the court. Once that happens, you're fighting an uphill battle with lawyers you can't afford against a company that has unlimited resources. Your only chance is proving fraud before it reaches court. Caleb looked at Boyd. What do you think? I think she's right. I think it's also completely insane, and I think if we're doing it, we better do it soon before I come to my senses. Tommy? The young man shrugged. I got nowhere else to be. Might as well get arrested doing something interesting. They all looked at Evelyn, who was sitting there with flowers still on her dress, and exhaustion carved into every line of her face, proposing they commit a felony like it was a normal Thursday evening activity. You've done this before, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Not this exactly. But I've fought men like Barrett before, and I've learned that people like him only win because everyone else is too scared or too law-abiding to fight dirty. She paused. I'm not law-abiding anymore, and I'm done being scared. When? Boyd asked. Saturday night. Bank closes at noon on Saturday and doesn't open again until Monday. Gives us a day and a half before anyone notices we were there. How do we get in? I'll figure it out. Evelyn stood up, suddenly aware that she'd just proposed they break into a bank, and they'd all agreed like it was a reasonable plan instead of potential suicide. I need to think. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her narrow bed with her hands shaking. Not from fear, exactly, from the realization that somewhere between making bread and saving every penny, she'd become someone who could plan a crime without flinching. Victor would be horrified. The old Evelyn would be horrified. But the new Evelyn, The one who'd rebuilt herself from flour and stubborn determination just felt grimly practical about the whole thing. She spent Friday gathering information, talked to Martha, whose brother worked as the night custodian at the bank, learned that he kept the back door key in his coat pocket, that he took his dinner break at 8 o'clock sharp, and that he was desperately worried about paying for his daughter's medicine. Evelyn paid for the medicine. In exchange, Martha's brother agreed to leave the back door unlocked Saturday night and to be conveniently absent from 10 until midnight. "You're not going to rob the place?" he asked nervously. "We're going to look at some old files, that's all." "That's still illegal." "So is forging loan documents to steal someone's ranch. Pick your illegal?" He picked his, and Evelyn had her way in. Saturday night came too fast and not fast enough. Maisie had gone to stay with Martha in town, told it was a special sleepover, not told her father was about to commit a felony. The ranch hands had been sent home early. The house was empty except for the three of them preparing to do something monumentally stupid. Boyd brought a camera he'd borrowed from the newspaper office, one of those new portable ones that didn't require a full darkroom setup. Tommy brought rope and tools in case they needed to break into anything once they were inside. Caleb brought a rifle, which Evelyn made him leave in the wagon. "We're not shooting anyone," she said firmly. "Not planning to. But if Barrett shows up, then we talk our way out. Or run. Or both. But we don't shoot anyone." She looked at him in the darkness. "You shoot someone, this stops being trespassing and starts being something else entirely. Something that ends with you hanged and Maisie an orphan. That the legacy you want?" Caleb put the rifle back in the wagon. They drove to town in silence, taking the back roads, parking 2 streets away from the bank. The night was cold and clear, stars everywhere, the kind of sky that made you feel small and seen at the same time. The bank was a 2-story brick building that looked newer and sturdier than most things in Harden Ridge. The back door was unlocked as promised. They slipped inside like thieves, which is exactly what they were. The interior was dark except for moonlight through tall windows. Their footsteps echoed on wood floors that probably cost more than Caleb's entire house. Everything smelled like paper and money and the particular kind of silence that came with places where important things happened. "Archives are in the basement," Evelyn whispered. Martha said her brother keeps them organized by decade. They found the stairs and descended into darkness thick enough to taste. Boyd lit a small lantern, keeping the light minimal. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into shadows, each one labeled with years and categories that meant something to bank people and nothing to anyone else. 1847, Caleb muttered, scanning labels. "Here." The cabinet was locked. Tommy had it open in under a minute with tools he didn't explain and nobody asked about. Inside were hundreds of files, organized with the kind of meticulous care that suggested someone's entire personality was built around alphabetical order. They found the loan documents 20 minutes later, filed under T for Thorn. Evelyn spread them on the floor, studying them by lantern light while Boyd set up the camera. The original loan agreement was there, legitimate, dated 1847, signed by Caleb's grandfather. But attached to it were payment records showing regular payments every month for 15 years, until the final payment was made in 1862. Paid in full. Loan satisfied. No outstanding balance. "That bastard," Caleb breathed. "He just erased all the payments." "Not erased. Ignored." Evelyn pointed to the signatures. "These records are witnessed and notarized. Legally binding. If we can photograph these and get them in front of a judge, Barrett's claim falls apart." Boyd was already working, positioning documents, adjusting the camera, taking photograph after photograph. Each click of the shutter sounded impossibly loud in the basement silence. They were halfway through documenting everything when they heard footsteps upstairs. Everyone froze. The footsteps crossed the main floor, deliberate and unhurried. Not the custodian, he walked faster with a slight drag from his bad hip. Not random chance. These steps knew where they were going. "Someone knew we'd be here," Boyd whispered. They extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed them whole. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. They stayed absolutely still, barely breathing, listening to those footsteps move closer to the basement stairs. A light appeared at the top of the stairs. Then a voice Evelyn recognized from Thursday afternoon. "I know you're down there, Thorn." Silas Barrett descended the stairs with a lantern held high, moving like he owned the place, which he probably would soon enough. Breaking and entering, theft, destruction of property. That's at least 5 years in territorial prison, maybe more. He reached the basement floor and raised his lantern higher, illuminating the four of them standing among scattered documents and borrowed camera equipment, caught red-handed in a crime they couldn't talk their way out of. Barrett smiled. Or you could sign the property over right now, and I'll tell the sheriff this was all a misunderstanding. Your choice. Caleb looked like he was seriously considering violence. Boyd's hand had moved toward his belt where he probably had a knife. Tommy looked ready to run. Evelyn stepped forward. You want Blackthorn Ranch that badly? She asked. Want? Barrett laughed. I don't want it. I own it. The debt is real, the claim is legal, and in 2 weeks a judge will agree with me. This little adventure of yours just moves up my timeline. The debt was paid. We have the records right here. Records that'll disappear before morning, along with any copies you might have made. Barrett's smile widened. You're thinking very small, Miss Mercer. Miss Mercer, this isn't about one ranch. This is about a railroad line that'll make me richer than everyone in this valley combined. Your employer's ranch is just the first domino. There are 6 more properties between here and the state line that'll fall the same way. Legal claims, old debts, convenient foreclosures. By this time next year, I'll own this entire valley. Not if people know what you're doing. And who's going to tell them? You? The bank-robbing cook? Barrett shook his head. Even if you make it out of here without charges, who's going to believe a woman with no credibility accusing a respected businessman of fraud? The words hit like a punch. Because he was right. In any court, any public forum, Barrett's word would carry weight that Evelyn's never would. He was educated, connected, wealthy. She was nobody. Just another desperate woman who'd run out of options. But Victor had taught her something useful during those years in Boston. How men like Barrett thought. How they assumed their power was permanent and their victory was certain. How they got sloppy when they thought they'd already won. You're right, Evelyn said quietly. Nobody would believe me, but they might believe the newspaper, or the territorial marshal, or the other families you've defrauded who've been too scared to speak up until now. Barrett's smile faltered, just slightly. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that railroad fraud is a federal offense. I'm talking about the investigation that'll start the moment these documents reach the right people. I'm talking about how many of your legal claims will hold up under actual scrutiny. She moved closer, close enough to see the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You spent years building this scheme. You've got money and lawyers and fake documents, but you made one mistake. What mistake? You told us about it. Evelyn's voice was steel-wrapped in exhaustion. You told us this is bigger than one ranch, which means there are witnesses, other families, other forged debts, and once one domino falls, they all fall. You're bluffing. Maybe. But are you willing to risk it? She gestured at the documents on the floor. We photographed these tonight. Tomorrow they go to every newspaper between here and Denver, every territorial official who'll listen, every family you've targeted, and then we wait to see how long your empire lasts when people start asking questions. The basement was silent except for breathing and the distant sound of wind against the building's walls. Barrett stood there with his lantern and his expensive suit and the slowly dawning realization that he might have underestimated exactly how desperate these people were. You'll go to prison, he said finally. Maybe, Evelyn agreed, but you'll go with us. And something tells me prison is harder for men who are used to silk sheets and servants. Barrett looked between them. This cook who'd somehow become the spokesperson, this rancher who looked ready to kill him, these ranch hands who'd committed a felony for a place that wasn't even theirs. He was doing math in his head, calculating odds and risks and potential losses. Then footsteps thundered overhead. Multiple people, moving fast. The custodian burst into the basement, followed by Boyd's cousin Miguel and 3 other men from ranches in the valley, all of them armed, all of them looking like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Everyone all right down here? Miguel called. Boyd grinned. Took you long enough. Had to wait for the signal. Miguel looked at Barrett. You must be the railroad man we've been hearing about. Funny thing, my family got served papers last week about an old debt we supposedly owe. Same company you represent. And mine, said one of the other men. Debt from 1851. Convenient how these old loans keep surfacing right when the railroad needs land. Barrett's face had gone very pale. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered and clearly recalculating his entire strategy. "This is harassment," he managed. "This is protection," Miguel corrected. "Turns out when you try to steal from everyone at once, everyone bands together." He looked at Caleb. "You get what you needed?" "Most of it." "Then I suggest we all leave before the actual sheriff shows up. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings." They filed out of the basement in a group, carrying documents and camera equipment, and the grim satisfaction of people who just won a battle they weren't entirely sure they should have fought. Barrett stayed in the basement, presumably trying to figure out how his certain victory had turned into a complete disaster. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Evelyn's whole body was shaking, adrenaline and fear, and the dawning realization that they'd actually done it. They'd broken into a bank, stolen evidence, confronted a dangerous man, and somehow made it out without getting arrested or killed. "You planned this," Caleb said to Boyd. "Evelyn planned it. I just invited backup." Boyd clapped him on the shoulder. "Turns out half the valley's been targeted by Barrett's company. Once Miguel heard what we were doing, he spread the word, figured having witnesses would help." "Witnesses to us committing a crime?" "Witnesses to Barrett admitting fraud." Miguel held up a small device, one of those new Edison cylinder recorders. "Got every word. Not admissible in court, but the newspapers will love it." Evelyn stared at the recorder. "That's insurance," Miguel finished. "Barrett's not the only one who can play dirty." They drove back to the ranch in silence, each of them processing what they'd just done. Evelyn kept expecting to hear hoofbeats behind them, lawmen coming to arrest them, Barrett's people coming for revenge. But the night stayed quiet. At the ranch, they unloaded the camera and documents and carried everything into Caleb's office. Boyd started developing the photographs immediately. Apparently, he'd learned the process years ago and still remembered enough to make it work. The images appeared slowly in the chemical bath, showing clear evidence of paid debts and satisfied loans. It was after 3 a.m. when they finally finished. Everyone was exhausted and wired and trying not to think too hard about what they'd done. "This goes to the territorial marshal tomorrow," Caleb said, organizing the photographs. "Along with copies to every newspaper and every family Barrett's targeted." "He'll come after us," Tommy pointed out. "Let him." Caleb's voice was hard. "Man wants a fight, he'll get one." Miguel and the others left just before dawn. Boyd collapsed on the couch, too tired to ride home. Evelyn went to the kitchen and started making bread because her hands needed something to do, and bread was the only thing that ever made sense when the world felt like it was ending. Caleb found her there an hour later, kneading dough with mechanical precision. "You should sleep," he said. "Can't." "You're going to collapse." "Probably." She punched down the dough harder than necessary. "But right now I need to make bread. Need to do something normal. Need to remember that the world still has normal things in it." Caleb moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth from his body. "What you did tonight, we did." "What you did," he insisted, "was save this ranch. You planned everything, handled Barrett, kept all of us from panicking. I committed a felony because I've done enough running to know when the only option is standing still and fighting dirty." She looked up at him with eyes that were too bright and too honest. "Don't make me into something heroic. I'm just desperate, and desperate people do desperate things." "You're not just desperate." "What am I then?" Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one flour-dusted hand. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm terrified constantly." "I know. That's what makes you brave." They stood there in the pre-dawn kitchen with flour everywhere and exhaustion, making them both stupid and honest. Evelyn knew she should step back, should maintain the careful distance she'd been keeping since the day she arrived, should remember that getting close to people meant giving them the power to hurt you. Instead, she leaned into his hand and let herself feel safe for just one moment. Then Maisie's voice called from upstairs, asking if anyone was awake, and the moment shattered. Caleb stepped back. Evelyn went back to kneading, and they both pretended something hadn't just shifted between them into something neither was ready to name. But that night, lying in her narrow bed with her sourdough starter bubbling on the windowsill and her hidden money tin under her mattress, Evelyn realized something that terrified her more than Victor, more than Barrett, more than any of the dangers she'd been running from. She was in love with Caleb Thorne, and love was the most dangerous thing she'd ever let herself feel. The photographs reached the territorial marshal's office on Monday morning. By Tuesday, 3 newspapers had picked up the story. By Wednesday, Silas Barrett had disappeared from Harden Ridge entirely, though rumors said he'd been seen boarding an eastbound train with enough luggage to suggest he wasn't planning to return anytime soon. By Thursday, Evelyn realized the danger she'd been preparing for hadn't gone anywhere. It had just been waiting for her to feel safe enough to stop looking over her shoulder. She was in the kitchen making rolls when the feeling hit her, that specific cold dread that lived in her spine. She looked up sharply and saw a man standing at the gate. Not a rancher, not a townsperson. Someone else. Someone who didn't belong. He was tall, well-dressed in a way that said money without shouting it, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so carefully blank. He stood there looking at the ranch house like he was cataloging every detail for future reference. Evelyn's hands froze in the dough. She knew that posture, that careful assessment, that particular brand of expensive patience. This wasn't one of Barrett's people. This was something worse. Boyd appeared from the barn and walked toward the man with his hand resting casually on his belt, near where he kept a knife. They spoke briefly. The man handed Boyd something, a card, probably, and Boyd's entire body language changed. He looked back at the house, specifically at the kitchen window, and even from this distance Evelyn could see the concern on his face. The man at the gate followed Boyd's gaze and looked directly at her. Their eyes met. Evelyn felt her stomach drop through the floor. She knew him, not personally. She'd never seen him before in her life. But she knew what he represented, the careful grooming, the expensive clothes that didn't draw attention, the way he stood like he had all the time in the world because time was something he owned. Victor had sent someone. After 3 years. After 8 states. After she'd finally, stupidly, let herself believe she might actually be safe. Victor had found her. Evelyn set down the dough with shaking hands and walked to her room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She pulled the tin from under her bed. $147 now, enough for a train ticket to California and maybe a month of survival after that. She could be gone in an hour, pack her trunk, take her starter, disappear before whoever that man was had time to report back to Victor. She was pulling her dresses from the nails on the wall when Maisie appeared in the doorway. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Evelyn's hand stilled on a faded cotton dress that had seen better years. "I have to." "Why?" "Because someone found me. Someone I've been running from for a long time." Evelyn forced herself to keep packing, to keep moving, because if she stopped, she might lose her nerve entirely. "I'm sorry, I know I said I wouldn't leave, but you promised." The words hit like a fist. Evelyn turned to see Maisie standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face and an expression that was equal parts betrayal and understanding. The look of a child who'd been abandoned before and could see it happening again. "I know," Evelyn whispered. "I'm sorry." "Everyone leaves." Maisie's voice was thick with tears. "Mama left, the other cooks left, now you're leaving. Everyone always leaves." "I don't want to." "Then don't." Maisie crossed her arms, trying to look fierce even though tears were still falling. "Stay and fight, like you made Papa fight Barrett, like you made me fight being scared. Stay and fight." "This is different." "How?" "Because the person looking for me is dangerous in ways Barrett never was. He has money and lawyers, and he doesn't stop until he wins." Evelyn's voice cracked. "If I stay, he'll hurt everyone here trying to get to me. Your father, Boyd, you. And I won't let that happen." "So you're going to run forever?" "If that's what keeps you safe, yes." "That's not what Mama would have done." Maisie wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Mama would have stayed. She would have fought. She wouldn't have run just because things got scary." The words were meant to hurt, and they did. Evelyn felt them sink in like knives, sharp and accurate. Because Maisie was right, running was the coward's choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected everyone except the person doing the running. But Evelyn had been a coward for 3 years, and she'd survived. Brave people got hurt. Brave people got killed. Cowards got to keep breathing. "I'm not your mother," Evelyn said quietly. "I know, but I thought you were brave like her." Maisie turned and left, and her disappointment was worse than any anger could have been. Evelyn finished packing because she didn't know what else to do. By the time Caleb came looking for her, she had her trunk ready and her starter wrapped in cloth and her money tin clutched in hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Caleb stood in the doorway exactly where Maisie had stood, but his expression was different, not betrayed, not angry, just tired in a way that suggested he'd been expecting this since the day she arrived. "Boyd said there's someone here to see you," he said. "Man named Whitmore. Says he's a lawyer from Boston. I'm not talking to him." Figured. Caleb looked at the packed trunk. "Where will you go?" "Does it matter?" "To me it does." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Caleb, don't what? Don't care that you're leaving? Don't care that my daughter just spent 20 minutes crying in her room because another person she loves is abandoning her?" His voice was carefully controlled, which somehow made it worse. "Or don't ask you to stay because I'm in love with you, and the thought of you leaving is worse than any debt or railroad scheme or threat Barrett could have made?" The room went very quiet. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at him, this man who'd given her work when she had nothing, who'd let her rebuild his kitchen and his daughter, and maybe part of himself, who was standing there admitting he loved her like it was the simplest and most complicated thing in the world. "You don't love me," she said. "You love what I did for Maisie, for the ranch. That's not the same thing. Don't tell me what I feel. I'm telling you the truth. You're grateful. Grateful turns into affection. Affection feels like love when you're lonely enough." She picked up her trunk. "But I'm not staying so you can figure out the difference." "That's not fair." "No, but it's honest." Evelyn moved toward the door, but Caleb didn't step aside. "Please move." "Talk to Whitmore first." "I'm not talking to anyone Victor sent." "Then talk to him for me. For Maisie. Because maybe he's not here to drag you back. Maybe he's here for something else." Caleb's voice softened. "And if he is here to drag you back, then you run. I won't stop you, but you don't know until you talk to him." "I know enough." "You're scared enough. That's different." They stared at each other in the small room that had been Evelyn's home for 6 months, surrounded by everything she owned and everything she was preparing to leave behind. Finally, she set down the trunk. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all he gets. That's all I'm asking." Whitmore was waiting in Caleb's office, sitting in the chair across from the desk like he'd been invited instead of tolerated. He stood when Evelyn entered, offering a smile that was professionally pleasant and meant absolutely nothing. "Miss Mercer, or should I say Mrs. Hale?" "Mercer's fine." Evelyn stayed near the door, keeping her exit clear. "You have 5 minutes. Then I'll be direct." Whitmore pulled papers from his briefcase with the efficient movements of someone who did this for a living. "I represent Victor Hale. 3 weeks ago, he received information suggesting you might be in this area. He hired me to locate you and deliver a message. I'm not going back." "He's not asking you to." Whitmore set the papers on the desk. "Mr. Hale wants a divorce." Evelyn's entire world tilted sideways. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "What?" "A divorce. Dissolution of marriage. He's prepared to grant you very generous terms, freedom from any marital obligations, retention of your maiden name, and a financial settlement of $5,000 contingent on your signature and your agreement to never contact him or his family again." The number was so absurd it took a moment to process. $5,000. That was more money than most people saw in their entire lives. That was enough to buy a house, start a real business, live comfortably for years. That was enough money to make her disappear so completely that Victor would never find her again. "Why?" Evelyn asked. "I'm not privy to Mr. Hale's personal motivations." "Why?" she repeated, harder this time. "Victor spent 3 years hunting me. He's not the kind of man who gives up. He's not the kind of man who offers divorces and settlements. So why now?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment, his professional mask slipping just slightly. "Between us, he's engaged. To a senator's daughter. Very prestigious match, but she won't marry him while he's technically still married to you. So he needs you gone in a way that's legally permanent and socially acceptable. He's replacing me. He's moving on. As, I would suggest, should you." Whitmore pushed the papers toward her. "Sign these. Take the money. Start your life over somewhere he'll never find you. It's more than generous considering the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "That you abandoned your lawful husband, stole from him, and have been living under an assumed name for 3 years. Mr. Hale could prosecute you for theft. could have you arrested and returned to Boston in chains. Instead, he's offering you freedom and money. Whitmore's voice was perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical. I strongly suggest you take it. Evelyn looked at the papers on the desk. Divorce decree. Settlement agreement. Freedom written in legal language and sealed with money that would solve every practical problem in her life. All she had to do was sign. All she had to do was let Victor win one more time. Where do I sign? She asked quietly. Whitmore looked relieved. He pulled out a pen and indicated 3 different places requiring her signature. Evelyn signed mechanically, her hand moving across paper like it belonged to someone else. Each signature felt like giving away a piece of herself. Each one felt like survival. The money will be transferred to whatever bank you designate once the divorce is finalized. Should take approximately 8 weeks. Whitmore gathered the papers with obvious satisfaction. You're making the right choice, Miss Mercer. Am I? Yes. Mr. Hale is a powerful man with powerful friends. Fighting him would be expensive, protracted, and ultimately futile. This way, everyone gets what they want. Except I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to be left alone. And now you will be. Whitmore stood and offered his hand. Evelyn didn't take it. He withdrew the gesture without apparent offense and headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Hale mentioned you were an excellent cook. Said he actually missed your bread after you left. Highest compliment I've ever heard him give anyone. He left. Evelyn stood alone in the office, staring at the empty chair and trying to process what had just happened. She was free. Legally, completely, permanently free. Victor couldn't hunt her anymore. Couldn't claim her. Couldn't drag her back to Boston and lock her somewhere she couldn't escape. She was free, and she was about to be wealthy enough to go anywhere and do anything and never worry about survival again. She should feel relieved, grateful, triumphant. Instead, she felt numb. Caleb appeared in the doorway. What did he want? Victor wants a divorce. I signed the papers. That's good? Yes. He's paying me $5,000 to disappear permanently. That's very good. Evelyn's voice was flat and distant. I should start packing again. Once the money comes through, I can go anywhere. California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere far. You're still leaving. There's nothing keeping me here now. The threat's gone. Victor's moved on. I'm free to leave without worrying he'll follow. Except you don't want to leave. I never wanted to leave. I had to. She finally looked at him. But now I don't have to, which means staying is a choice. And I don't know how to make choices. I only know how to survive. Caleb crossed the room and took her hands. Rough rancher hands holding cook's hands, both of them calloused and scarred and honest. Then choose survival. Choose staying alive. Choose being here with people who love you instead of running toward people who don't know you yet and probably won't understand why you wake up screaming sometimes, or why you count money 3 times before you spend it, or why you keep a bag packed under your bed just in case. How did you know about the bag? Because I do the same thing. Different reasons. Same instinct. He squeezed her hands gently. We're both broken, Evelyn. Both barely holding ourselves together. But maybe broken people are supposed to find each other. Maybe that's how we stop being quite so broken. I don't know how to not be broken. Neither do I. But we could figure it out together. Evelyn wanted to say yes. Wanted to lean into this moment and this man and the possibility that maybe, finally, she could stop running. But 3 years of survival instincts were screaming at her that staying was dangerous and love was dangerous, and letting herself want things was the fastest way to lose them. I need time, she said finally. To think. To figure out what I want instead of what I'm running from. How much time? I don't know. Caleb nodded slowly and released her hands. Then take it. Take whatever time you need. But Evelyn, you should know. I'm not going anywhere. However long it takes for you to figure out what you want, I'll still be here. He left before she could argue, before she could list all the reasons why promising to wait for someone was stupid, and he should move on and find someone less damaged. Evelyn went back to her room. Her trunk was still packed. Her starter was still wrapped. Her money tin was still clutched in her hands. She could leave right now. Nothing was stopping her except herself. Instead, she unpacked. Slowly. Each dress returned to its nail felt like a small act of defiance against every instinct telling her to run. Each item put back in place felt like choosing something instead of just surviving something. By the time she finished, it was late afternoon. She fed her starter, started bread dough, and went to find Maisie. The girl was in her room, curled up on her bed with her face buried in a pillow. She didn't look up when Evelyn knocked. "I'm staying," Evelyn said from the doorway. Maisie's head shot up. Her face was blotchy from crying, her hair was a mess, and her expression was equal parts hope and suspicion. "Why?" "Because you were right. Running forever isn't living, and I'm tired of not living." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed. "Also because I promised you I wouldn't leave, and I'm trying to become the kind of person who keeps promises instead of breaking them." "You're really staying?" "I'm really staying, at least for now. At least until I figure out what comes next." Maisie launched herself at Evelyn with enough force to nearly knock them both off the bed. She wrapped her arms around Evelyn's neck and held on like she was drowning, and Evelyn was the only solid thing in the world. "I'm sorry I said you weren't brave," Maisie whispered. "You were right about that too. I'm not brave. I'm just trying to be." "Trying counts." They stayed like that until Maisie's breathing evened out and the tension left her small body. When they finally separated, Maisie wiped her face and looked at Evelyn with those two old eyes. "Are you going to marry Papa?" The question caught Evelyn completely off guard. "What?" "Papa loves you, I can tell. And you love him, even though you're pretending you don't." Maisie's voice was matter of fact, like she was discussing the weather instead of something that made Evelyn's heart race. "So, are you going to marry him?" "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I just got divorced from a man who hurt me. Because your father and I barely know each other. Because I don't know how to be someone's wife without losing myself in the process." Evelyn paused. "Because I'm scared. Mama used to say being scared is okay. Being scared and doing things anyway is what makes you brave." "Your mother was wise." "She was." Maisie's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different, sad tears instead of angry ones. "I miss her. I know. And I'm not trying to replace her. I could never replace her. I don't want you to replace her. I just want you to stay." Maisie took Evelyn's hand. "You can be scared and stay. Both things can be true." Out of the mouths of 9-year-olds came wisdom that adults spent years trying to learn. Evelyn squeezed Maisie's hand and made a promise she hoped she could keep. "I'll stay. For as long as you want me here." "Forever, then." "That's a long time." "I know." Maisie smiled through her tears. "But we've got a lot of bread to make." That night, Evelyn made dinner for the ranch. Boyd, Tommy, Caleb, and Maisie gathered around the table eating pot roast and fresh rolls and pretending everything was normal instead of fragile and new. They talked about the ranch, about the upcoming cattle sale, about Maisie starting school in 2 weeks and being nervous about it. They didn't talk about Whitmore or Victor or divorce papers or the fact that Evelyn had almost left and chosen to stay instead. But after dinner, when everyone else had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Caleb found Evelyn in the kitchen cleaning up. "Thank you," he said, "for staying. Thank Maisie. She's the one who convinced me." "I will. But I'm thanking you." He leaned against the counter, keeping careful distance between them. "What Whitmore said about Victor, about him moving on, you okay with that?" "I don't know. Part of me is relieved. Part of me is angry that he gets to just replace me and move on like the last 3 years didn't happen. Like he didn't destroy my life." She scrubbed at a pot that was already clean. "And part of me is terrified that this is a trick, that he's not actually done and he's just waiting for me to let my guard down." "Is that likely?" "With Victor, anything's likely." She set down the pot and turned to face him. "But I'm done letting him control my life. Even if this is a trick, even if he's still hunting me, I'm done running. I'm staying here. I'm building something that's mine. And if he tries to take that away, I'll fight him." "We'll fight him," Caleb corrected. "You can't promise that. Watch me." They looked at each other across the kitchen that Evelyn had rebuilt from neglect and grief, in the house that had become something like home, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a ranch settling in for the night. "I meant what I said earlier," Caleb said quietly, "about loving you. That wasn't gratitude or loneliness or me being confused. I love you. And I know you're not ready to hear that. No, you might never be ready. But you should know anyway, because you deserve to be loved by someone who sees everything you are and doesn't want you to be anything different. Evelyn's throat was tight. Her eyes were burning. Caleb, you don't have to say anything back. You don't have to feel the same way. You can take all the time you need to figure out what you want. He pushed off the counter. But I needed you to know. Needed you to understand that you're not here because we need a cook, or because Maisie needs someone, or because I'm lonely. You're here because you're you, and that's enough. He left before she could respond, before she could try explaining that she did love him, but loving people was terrifying, and she didn't know how to do it without losing herself in the process. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen with clean dishes and a full heart, and the realization that for the first time in her entire life, someone loved her, not despite her flaws, but including them. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing anyone had ever given her. She went to bed that night and didn't pack a bag. Didn't count her money 3 times. Didn't plan escape routes or calculate how far she could run before Victor found her again. She just slept. And when she woke up the next morning, she was still there. Still at Blackthorn Ranch. Still choosing to stay instead of run. It was a start. The weeks that followed were strange and fragile and new. Evelyn fell into a rhythm that felt almost like normal, making bread, cooking meals, expanding her business, helping Maisie prepare for school. She hired 2 more women from town to help with baking. Her bread business was making more money than she'd thought possible, enough that she was thinking about opening an actual storefront instead of just working from the ranch kitchen. Caleb kept his distance but stayed close, giving her space while making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. They talked over coffee in the mornings and dinner in the evenings, conversations that were carefully casual on the surface, but heavy with everything neither of them was saying yet. Maisie thrived. She started school and came home every day with stories about her classmates and her teacher and things she'd learned. She still had bad days, still went quiet sometimes, but those days were getting rarer. Everything was good. Everything was working. Which is, of course, when Victor arrived. He came on a cold October evening just as the sun was setting, riding alone on a horse that probably cost more than the entire ranch. He wore traveling clothes that still looked expensive and a hat that protected his face from sun he'd probably never spent much time in. Evelyn was carrying water from the well when she saw him at the gate. She froze, the bucket slipping from her hands and spilling across the ground. Victor dismounted slowly, gracefully, like he had all the time in the world. He tied his horse and walked toward the house with the confident stride of someone who'd never been told no in a way that mattered. Boyd appeared from the barn, moving to intercept, but Victor held up one hand. "I'm here to speak with my wife," he called. "Just to talk. Nothing more." "Ex-wife," Evelyn said, finding her voice. "The papers are signed." "Not yet, they're not. They're filed, but not finalized. Legally, you're still married to me for another 6 weeks." Victor stopped a respectful distance away, making no move to come closer. "May we speak? Privately?" Every instinct Evelyn had was screaming at her to run. But running was what the old Evelyn would have done. The new Evelyn, the one who'd broken into a bank and confronted railroad tycoons and chosen to stay instead of disappearing, stood her ground. "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of witnesses." "Very well." Victor looked around at the ranch with an expression that was carefully neutral. "This is where you've been hiding? Cooking on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming?" "I wasn't hiding. I was living. Living." Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It never had. "Is that what you call this? Working yourself to exhaustion? Sleeping in a room the size of a closet? Baking bread for miners and railroad workers?" "Yes, that's exactly what I call it. You could have had so much more. Back in Boston, with me. I would have given you everything. You gave me nothing I wanted and took everything I had." Evelyn's voice was steady, despite her shaking hands. "So yes, Victor, this is living. And it's more than I ever had with you." Something flickered across Victor's face. Surprise, maybe, or anger, carefully controlled. "Whitmore said you signed the divorce papers." "I did." "Then why am I here?" He pulled an envelope from his coat. "Because after you signed, I had my people do some digging. Wanted to make sure you weren't going to cause problems after the divorce was finalized. And do you know what I found?" Evelyn's stomach dropped. "What?" "That you've been quite busy." building a little bread empire, making actual money, becoming someone who matters in this community. Victor's smile sharpened. And more interestingly, that you've been living here with a widowed rancher and his daughter. Quite the cozy arrangement. It's not what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. He opened the envelope and pulled out photographs. Her at the market selling bread. Her at the ranch with Caleb. Her with Maisie. Someone had been watching her for weeks without her knowing. Facts are, you abandoned your husband, stole money, and have been living in sin with another man while still legally married to me. We're not living in sin. I'm the cook. I have my own room. Do you really think a judge will care about those details? Do you think a territorial court will look at these photographs and believe you're just the cook? Victor's voice was pleasant, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of her entire life. Because I think if I present this evidence, along with testimony that you're an adulterer and a thief, you'll lose everything, your business, your reputation, possibly your freedom. You said you wanted the divorce. I do. But I want it on my terms, not yours. He tucked the photographs away. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come back to Boston with me. You're going to live in a separate residence I've arranged. Very nice apartment, completely private. You're going to stay there quietly until the divorce is finalized. Then you'll take your settlement money and disappear to wherever you want, with the understanding that if you ever speak to anyone about our marriage or try to damage my reputation, these photographs and this evidence will surface and destroy any life you try to build. You can't force me to go with you. I'm not forcing anything. I'm offering you a choice. Victor's voice hardened. Come with me now. Live comfortably for 6 weeks and walk away with your money and your freedom. Or stay here, fight me in court, lose everything including your reputation, and spend whatever years you have left explaining to people why you're not actually an adulteress and a thief, even though the legal record says otherwise. That's not a choice. That's blackmail. That's leverage. And I'm very good at leverage. He gestured at the ranch, at the house where Maisie was probably watching from a window, at the barn where Boyd and Tommy had appeared and were watching with tense, angry expressions. These people you've attached yourself to, they'll suffer too. The rancher will be named as your accomplice. His daughter will be dragged through court proceedings. Their name will be dirt in every town between here and Denver. Is that what you want? Evelyn felt like she couldn't breathe. Everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, everything she'd chosen overrunning. Victor was going to take it all away with photographs and lies and legal manipulation, just like he always did. How long do I have to decide? She asked quietly. I'm staying at the hotel in town tonight. I'll be back tomorrow at noon for your answer. Victor mounted his horse with practiced ease. Make the right choice, Evelyn. For once in your life, be smart instead of stubborn. He rode away, leaving Evelyn standing in the yard with her spilled water bucket and her shaking hands in the certain knowledge that she was about to lose everything that mattered. Again. Caleb found Evelyn in the kitchen an hour later, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She was staring at nothing, her face blank in that way that meant she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere darker, somewhere that had nothing to do with the warm kitchen or the fresh bread cooling on the counter. Boyd told me what happened, he said. Evelyn didn't look up. Then you know I have to leave. No, you don't. He has photographs. Evidence. Legal grounds to destroy everything if I don't go back with him. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she'd already made the decision and was just waiting for her body to catch up. If I fight him, he'll drag you and Maisie through court. He'll make sure everyone thinks I'm an adulteress and a thief. He'll ruin your reputation, your business, your daughter's future, all of it. Let him try. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand perfectly. Caleb sat down across from her. I understand he's a bully who uses money and fear to control people. I understand he spent years convincing you that you were powerless. And I understand that you're sitting here right now believing him instead of fighting back. Evelyn's eyes finally lifted to meet his. This isn't like Barrett. This isn't forged documents we can expose. Victor's evidence is real. I did leave him. I did take his money. And I have been living here with you while still legally married to him. He's not lying. He's just using the truth in the cruelest way possible. So we tell a different truth. What truth? That I ran away from an abusive marriage? That I've been hiding under a false name? That's not going to help. That you escaped. Caleb's voice was hard and certain. That you survived. That you built something from nothing. That every choice you made was about staying alive, not about hurting anyone. He leaned forward. People understand survival, Evelyn. They understand doing desperate things when you're desperate. And out here, people respect someone who fights for their life more than they respect some rich bastard from Boston trying to punish his wife for leaving. You're assuming people will believe me over him. I'm assuming people will believe what they see. And what they see is a woman who showed up with nothing, worked harder than anyone, helped save this ranch, built a business that employs other desperate women, and made my daughter speak again after 2 years of silence. He reached across the table and took her hands. That's the truth that matters, not whatever story Victor's trying to tell. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the truth would matter more than Victor's money and influence and carefully constructed narrative. But she'd spent 3 years learning that truth was just another weapon wealthy men used when it served them and ignored when it didn't. Even if people believe me, she said quietly, even if I fight him and somehow win, he'll appeal. He'll drag it out for years. He'll make it so expensive and so public that I'll wish I'd just gone back to Boston and lived in his apartment like he wanted. Then we make it expensive for him too. With what money? What leverage? He has everything. We have nothing. We have the truth. And we have each other. Caleb squeezed her hands. You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. You keep forgetting that. You're not some scared woman with nowhere to go and no one to help. You have a ranch full of people who would fight for you. You have women in town who depend on you for their livelihood. You have Maisie, who loves you. And you have me. He paused. You have me, and I'm not letting him take you. You can't stop him. Watch me. The certainty in his voice was almost painful. Evelyn pulled her hands away and stood up, pacing the kitchen because sitting still made her feel trapped. You're being romantic. Romantic is nice, but it doesn't win court cases. It doesn't beat men like Victor. And it definitely doesn't protect you when he decides to destroy everything you love just to make a point. So what's your alternative? Go back to Boston? Live in his apartment? Let him control the rest of your life just because he's too proud to let you go without punishing you first? Caleb stood too, blocking her pacing. That's not survival. That's surrender. And I've watched you for 6 months, Evelyn. You don't surrender. You fight. I'm tired of fighting. Then fight one more time. Just once more. And if you lose, if Victor wins and takes everything, then you run. I'll help you. I'll give you money, resources, whatever you need to disappear so completely he'll never find you again. His voice softened. But don't give up without fighting. Don't let him win because you're too scared to try. Maisie appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown even though it was nearly 8 o'clock. She looked small and scared and far too aware of what was happening. Are you leaving with the bad man? She asked. Evelyn's heart cracked. I don't want to. Then don't. It's not that simple. It is. Maisie crossed the kitchen and took Evelyn's hand. The bad man wants to scare you, wants you to think you don't have choices. But you do. You always do. You can choose to stay and fight, or you can choose to leave. But don't choose to leave because you think it's the only option. That's what Mama did. She got sick, and she gave up because she thought dying was her only option. But it wasn't. She could have fought harder, could have stayed longer. Tears were streaming down Maisie's face now. She chose to go. Don't choose to go. Please. The words hit like bullets. Evelyn knelt down so she was eye level with Maisie, the small, fierce girl who'd survived so much loss already and was begging her not to add more. Your mother didn't choose to die, Evelyn said gently. Sometimes people don't get choices. Sometimes sickness wins no matter how hard you fight. But you have a choice, and you're choosing to leave anyway. Maisie's voice broke. You're choosing the bad man over us. I'm trying to protect you. I don't want protection. I want you. Maisie threw her arms around Evelyn's neck. I want you to stay. I want you to fight. I want you to be brave like you taught me to be brave. Please, please don't go. Evelyn held the crying child and felt something shift inside her chest. Not breaking, the opposite of breaking. Something that had been fractured for years suddenly clicking into place. She'd spent 3 years running because running kept her safe. But safe wasn't the same as alive. Safe wasn't the same as mattering. And this child mattered. This ranch mattered. The women who depended on her business mattered. Caleb mattered. She mattered. Maybe it was time to stop running from that. Okay, Evelyn whispered into Maisie's hair. Okay, I'll stay. I'll fight. Promise? I promise. Maisie pulled back, her face blotchy and wet, but hopeful. What do we do? We figure out how to beat a man who thinks he's already won. They gathered that night in Caleb's office. Boyd, Tommy, Martha, and Clara from the bread business. Miguel and 2 other ranchers who'd fought Barrett with them. And even the sheriff, who showed up after Boyd sent word that they needed someone who understood territorial law. The sheriff was a tired-looking man in his 50s named Coleman, who'd seen enough trouble to recognize it when it walked through his door. He listened to Evelyn explain the situation, Victor, the divorce, the photographs, the blackmail, without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your husband sounds like a real piece of work, he said finally. Ex-husband. Almost. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. Can he do what he's threatening? Can he actually take me to court for adultery and theft based on those photographs? Technically, yes. But he'd have to file in territorial court, which means finding a judge willing to hear a case from an out-of-state plaintiff about a marriage that's already being dissolved. Coleman leaned back in his chair. Also, adultery requires proof of actual adultery. Living in the same house as a man isn't proof. Sharing meals isn't proof. Even being photographed together isn't proof unless there's evidence of actual romantic or sexual involvement. But he'll imply it, Evelyn said. He'll show those photographs and suggest things and let people's assumptions do the rest. People assume all kinds of things. Doesn't make them true. Coleman looked at Caleb. You willing to testify that your relationship with Miss Mercer has been strictly professional? Yes. And you have other people who can corroborate that? Ranch hands, townspeople, anyone who can confirm she's kept to her own quarters and maintained appropriate boundaries? Boyd raised his hand. I've been here every day for 6 months. Never saw anything inappropriate. She's the cook. Keeps to herself. Works harder than anyone I know. I can testify too, Martha said. She hired me and Clara when we had nowhere else to go. Treated us fair, paid us proper wages, never asked for anything except honest work. That's not a woman having an affair. That's a woman building a business. Others chimed in with similar testimonies. Ranchers who'd bought her bread, townspeople who'd watched her at the market, even the school teacher who'd seen her with Maisie and could vouch that she was exactly what she claimed to be, a cook who'd become part of a family. Coleman nodded slowly. So we have witnesses. That's good. What about the theft charge? I took $300 from Victor's safe when I left, Evelyn admitted. He's technically right about that. Technically, but you were married at the time, which means legally you had access to marital assets. Taking money from your own household isn't theft, it's withdrawal. Coleman's expression suggested he'd seen this particular situation before. Plenty of women take money when they leave bad marriages. Courts generally don't prosecute unless the amounts are significant enough to constitute actual theft rather than just taking what you needed to survive. $300 is significant, not compared to what you left behind. What was your husband's net worth when you married him? I don't know exactly. Hundreds of thousands, probably. So you took a tiny fraction of the marital assets. That's not theft. That's traveling money. Coleman stood up. Here's what I think. Your husband is bluffing. He's using fear and intimidation because that's what worked on you before. But his actual legal case is weak. He'd have trouble finding a judge willing to hear it, and even if he did, the evidence wouldn't support his claims. But he has photographs of you selling bread and talking to people and living your life. Those aren't evidence of crime. They're evidence that you left one place and built something new somewhere else. The sheriff headed for the door, then paused. You want my advice? Don't run. Don't negotiate. Don't give him anything. When he comes back tomorrow, tell him no. Tell him the divorce will proceed as planned. You're keeping your settlement, and if he tries taking you to court, you'll countersue for harassment and defamation. Men like him hate being challenged. He's expecting you to fold. Don't. After Coleman left, the group dispersed slowly. Martha and Clara promised to spread word through town about what was happening, building support before Victor could build opposition. Miguel and the other ranchers promised to be at the ranch tomorrow when Victor returned, a show of solidarity and subtle threat that Victor wouldn't be dealing with one isolated woman but an entire community. By midnight, It was just Evelyn, Caleb, and Boyd, sitting in the office with cold coffee and the weight of what they were about to do. This could still go wrong, Evelyn said. Victor could follow through on his threats, could drag us all through court, could destroy everything anyway. Could, Caleb agreed. Or we could win. Or we could fight him to a draw where both sides walk away damaged but still standing. Lots of possibilities. You're not scared? Terrified. But I'm more scared of what happens if we don't fight. If we let men like Victor and Barrett take what they want just because they're rich and mean and good at using law as a weapon. He looked at her. Someone has to stand up eventually. Might as well be us. I don't feel brave enough for this. Nobody ever does. That's the secret. Bravery isn't feeling confident. It's being scared and doing the thing anyway because the alternative is worse. Boyd stood up and stretched. I'm going to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and I want to be awake for it. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Evelyn, I'm glad you stayed. Would have been disappointed if you ran. Why? Because you're not a runner. You're a fighter. Took you a while to figure that out, but the rest of us saw it from the start. He left. Evelyn and Caleb sat in silence for a while, both of them too keyed up to sleep but too tired to do anything productive. I'm still scared, Evelyn said finally. Good. Means you're smart. Caleb stood and offered his hand. Come on. You should get some sleep. I won't be able to. Then come sit on the porch with me and we'll not sleep together. They sat on the porch steps, watching stars and listening to the ranch settle in for the night. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses shifting in the barn, wind moving through grass. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, sounds that reminded Evelyn what she was fighting for. What happens if we lose? She asked quietly. Then we lose. And we figure out what comes next. That's not a plan. No, but it's honest. Caleb looked at her. I can't promise we'll win tomorrow. Can't promise Victor will back down or the courts will side with us or everything will work out. All I can promise is that I'll be there. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. Why? The question came out smaller than she intended. Why are you doing this? Why risk everything for someone who showed up 6 months ago and might still disappear the moment things get hard? Because you're not going to disappear. You proved that tonight. You had a chance to run, and you stayed. He paused. And because I love you, told you that already. Hasn't changed. I don't know if I can love you back. Not the way you deserve. Don't need you to love me the way I deserve. Just need you to be honest about what you feel. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm afraid of you. Why? Because you make me want things I've spent 3 years not letting myself want. Safety, home, belonging, love. Her voice cracked. And wanting things gives them power to hurt me. Victor taught me that. The more you want something, the more control it has over you. So I stopped wanting, stopped letting myself care. And now you're here making me want things again, and I'm terrified. What if wanting things is what makes you alive instead of just surviving? What if wanting things is what gets me destroyed? Then you get destroyed. But at least you'll have lived first. Caleb took her hand. I'm not Victor. I'm not going to use your feelings against you. I'm not going to punish you for caring. That's not love. That's control. And they're not the same thing. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, rough and calloused and honest. I do love you. I think. I'm not sure I know what love is supposed to feel like when it's real instead of manipulative. But when I think about leaving, it hurts. And when I think about staying, it terrifies me. And I think maybe that's love, being terrified but staying anyway. That's definitely love. Caleb lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles gently. And for what it's worth, I'm terrified too. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of failing you. Terrified that I'm not enough to make you want to stay. So we're both scared. But maybe being scared together is better than being safe alone. They sat there until the stars started fading and the sky began turning that pale gray that came before dawn. Then they went inside, Caleb to his room and Evelyn to hers, both of them trying to rest before the day that would decide everything. Evelyn didn't sleep. She fed her sourdough starter and watched it bubble and grow, alive in the way stubborn things were when they refused to quit. She thought about all the women who'd kept this starter alive before her. Her great-grandmother, her grandmother, her mother, each of them feeding it and nurturing it and passing it on, even when everything else in their lives was falling apart. Survival, she realized, wasn't about running. It was about maintaining the small rituals that kept you tethered to being human, even when the world was trying to break you. She was still in the kitchen when Caleb found her at dawn. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her and looked at the jar of starter sitting on the counter, bubbling gently in the morning light. "It's still alive," he said finally. "Always is, long as you keep feeding it. Kind of like people." Kind of. They made breakfast together, eggs and bacon and fresh bread that Evelyn had started before midnight. By the time Boyd and Tommy arrived, the kitchen smelled like home and hope, and the particular kind of determination that came from deciding you were done being pushed around. Miguel and the other ranchers arrived by mid-morning. Martha and Clara came with their husbands. The sheriff showed up with a deputy. By 11:30, there were nearly 20 people gathered at Blackthorn Ranch, all of them there to stand with Evelyn against whatever Victor brought with him. At noon exactly, Victor arrived. He rode up to the gate and stopped, clearly not expecting the crowd. His expression flickered, surprise, then anger, then that carefully blank mask he wore when things weren't going according to plan. "I came to speak with Evelyn," he called. "Then speak," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "Everyone here can hear you." Victor dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning the group. "This is a private matter. Nothing about my life has been private since you started hunting me across half the country. So whatever you came to say it in front of witnesses." Victor's jaw tightened. He pulled the envelope of photographs from his coat and held them up. "I came to remind you what's at stake. These photographs prove you've been living with another man while still married to me. Proof of adultery. Proof that you stole from me and fled. Proof that you're exactly what I've always said you were. Unstable, dishonest, unfit. Those photographs prove I've been living my life, working, building a business, making friends. That's not crime, that's survival. That's betrayal. You're my wife. I'm not your wife. I'm a woman who escaped a controlling man and built something from nothing. And you're here because you can't stand that I did it without you. Can't stand that I'm happy. Can't stand that I proved I was never the weak, worthless person you spent years telling me I was." Victor's mask cracked. Anger flashed across his face. Real anger, not the calculated kind. "You took my money. You ran away like a thief in the night. You disappeared without explanation and left me to explain to everyone why my wife abandoned me. I left because you made my life a prison, because you controlled every dollar, every decision, every moment of my day, because you convinced me I was nothing without you and then acted surprised when I finally believed you enough to leave. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing I wanted and took everything I had." Evelyn's voice rose, months of suppressed anger finally breaking through. "You took my bank accounts. You took my inheritance from my mother. You took my friends and my independence and my belief that I was worth anything at all, and you called it love, called it protection, called it taking care of me. But it was control. It was ownership, and I refused to give you one more second of my life." The gathered crowd was silent. Some of them looked uncomfortable. This was intimate, painful, the kind of private hurt people usually kept hidden. But they stayed. They witnessed. Victor looked at the crowd, then back at Evelyn. "You think these people will protect you? You think this rancher and his friends can stop me from taking you to court, from destroying your reputation, from making sure you never work again?" "I think you're bluffing." Evelyn's voice was steady now. "I think you came here expecting me to be alone and scared, expected me to fold the way I always folded before. But I'm not alone. I'm not scared, and I'm not folding. The divorce will proceed as planned. I signed your papers. You'll get your precious senator's daughter. I'll get my freedom and my settlement, and after that, you'll never contact me again. That was the deal." "I'm changing the deal." "No, you're not." Sheriff Coleman stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, I'm the sheriff of this county. I've heard Miss Mercer's testimony. I've reviewed your claims, and I'm telling you plainly, you have no legal standing here. Adultery requires proof of actual romantic involvement, which you don't have. Theft requires proof of intent to permanently deprive someone of their property, which you don't have. What you have are photographs of a woman living her life and an obvious desire to punish her for leaving you. This is territorial jurisdiction, which I represent. And I'm telling you that if you pursue legal action against Miss Mercer, I'll be testifying on her behalf. So will 24 other witnesses who can confirm she's been nothing but honest, hardworking, and appropriate in all her conduct. Coleman crossed his arms. Now, you can accept the divorce terms you already agreed to and leave, or you can try fighting this in court and lose. Your choice. Victor stood there in his expensive clothes with his envelope of photographs and his carefully constructed case crumbling around him. Evelyn watched him process this, the realization that his leverage was gone, his intimidation had failed, and the woman he'd spent 3 years hunting had finally stopped running long enough to fight back. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "Maybe, but it'll be my regret, mine to own." Evelyn met his eyes. "You don't control my life anymore, Victor. You don't control my choices. You don't even control my regrets. I'm done being your property. You were never my property. You were my wife. Oh, I was your possession. There's a difference." She took a step closer. "And maybe one day you'll understand that. Maybe one day you'll realize that love isn't about control and marriage isn't about ownership. But that's not my problem anymore. That's between you and whatever poor woman you're marrying next." Victor looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to threaten, wanted to find some angle, some leverage, some way to win. But there was nothing left. His bluff had been called. His power had limits, and those limits had been reached. "The divorce will be finalized in 6 weeks," he said stiffly. "You'll receive your settlement per the original agreement. After that, I expect no further contact." "That's all I've ever wanted." Victor mounted his horse with as much dignity as he could salvage, which wasn't much. He looked at the gathered crowd, ranchers and townspeople and ordinary folks who'd stood with a woman they barely knew against a man with money and influence, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite respect, but recognition. The understanding that there were things in the world his money couldn't buy and power couldn't break. He rode away without another word. The crowd waited until he disappeared around the bend before erupting. People were hugging Evelyn, congratulating her, talking over each other about how Victor had looked when his threats fell apart. Someone started laughing and it spread, relief and triumph mixing into something almost giddy. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, feeling strangely disconnected. She'd won. Victor was gone. The threat was over. She was free. She should feel happy, relieved, triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. Caleb found her an hour later in the kitchen, making bread even though they had plenty and nobody was hungry. She was kneading dough with mechanical precision, her hands moving automatically, while her mind was somewhere else entirely. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know." She punched down the dough. "I won. I should be celebrating. Why am I not celebrating?" "Because winning doesn't erase 3 years of running, doesn't erase what he did to you. Doesn't make all the fear and trauma disappear just because he's gone." Caleb leaned against the counter. "You're allowed to feel complicated things." "I feel empty. Like I spent so long being afraid of him that I don't know who I am when he's not chasing me anymore." "Then you figure it out. Take time. Try things. Make mistakes." He smiled slightly. "Make bread, apparently. Bread makes sense. Everything else is confusing. Welcome to being alive instead of just surviving. It's confusing as hell." Evelyn kept kneading. "What happens now?" "Now, we live, we work, we figure out what comes next together, instead of you figuring it out alone. I'm not good at together. Neither am I. But we could learn." She looked at him, this man who'd given her work and spay and love in equal measure, who'd stood beside her when she faced Victor, who was offering her a future without demanding she be anyone other than herself. "I love you," she said. "I'm still scared. Still don't completely trust that this is real. Still have about 17 different kinds of trauma I need to work through. But I love you. That's enough for now. We'll figure out the rest as we go." They stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by bread and flour and the morning light. Two broken people who'd found each other and decided broken was good enough to build on. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. $5,000 arrived in Evelyn's bank account, more money than she'd ever imagined having. She used part of it to expand her bread business into a proper storefront in town. She hired more women, widows, abandoned wives, anyone who needed work and was willing to learn. Within 6 months, she had 8 employees and orders coming from 3 counties. Maisie thrived in school. She made friends, joined activities, grew louder and more confident every day. She still had bad days. Grief didn't disappear just because life got better, but those days were manageable now instead of consuming. Caleb's ranch recovered. With the debt threat gone and the cattle doing better, he was able to hire more hands and expand his herd. The ranch that had been dying when Evelyn arrived was alive again, productive again, profitable again. And Evelyn learned how to live instead of just survive. It wasn't easy. She still woke up sometimes convinced Victor was coming back, still counted her money 3 times, still kept a bag packed under her bed just in case. But slowly, so slowly, those instincts faded. The fear became manageable. The trauma became something she carried instead of something that carried her. One spring evening, almost a year after Victor left, Caleb found her on the porch watching the sunset. He sat down beside her without speaking, just being present in that comfortable way they'd developed. "I've been thinking," he said finally. "About?" "About the future. About what comes next." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "If you're about to propose, I need you to know I'm not ready for that. Maybe I'll never be ready. Marriage means things to me that it doesn't mean to other people. I was going to ask if you wanted to expand the bread business into Denver." She blinked. "Oh. But now that you mention it, yeah, eventually I'd like to marry you. Not now, not until you're ready, but eventually." He looked at her. "Because I love you. Because Maisie loves you. Because you're family whether we make it legal or not. But I want to make it legal. Want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours, and we chose each other." "That's terrifying. I know, but it's also beautiful. What if I'm never ready?" "Then we stay like this. Business partners, co-parents to Maisie, people who love each other without needing papers to prove it." He took her hand. "I don't need marriage to be happy. I just need you." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady certainty that he wasn't going anywhere. "Ask me again in a year." "Okay. And maybe in a year I'll be ready, or maybe I'll ask for another year. But I'm not saying no. I'm just saying not yet." "Not yet is fine." He kissed the top of her head. "I've got time." They sat there watching the sun set over the ranch, over the home they'd built together from broken pieces and stubborn determination and the kind of love that grew slowly and honestly instead of fast and desperate. And Evelyn realized something that changed everything. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't surviving. She wasn't just taking up space and hoping no one noticed. She was living. She was building a business that mattered, raising a child who needed her, loving a man who saw all her flaws and loved her anyway, making bread that fed people and employed women and turned flour and water into something sustaining and good. She mattered. Her work mattered. Her presence mattered. And for a woman who'd spent years being told she was worthless, that realization was more valuable than any settlement money or legal freedom or victory over powerful men. 2 years later, Caleb asked her again. This time, Evelyn said yes. They married in the spring on the ranch, surrounded by everyone who'd stood with them against Victor and Barrett and every other threat that had tried breaking them. Maisie stood beside Evelyn wearing a new dress and a smile that could have lit the entire valley. The ceremony was simple. The vows were honest. And when the preacher pronounced them married, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Whole. Not perfect. Not healed. Not free from all the trauma and fear and damage. Just whole enough to keep going. Whole enough to build on. Whole enough to matter. The bread business grew. The ranch prospered. Maisie went to school and came home with stories and friends and the kind of loud, messy joy that meant she'd survived her grief and come out the other side. And Evelyn made bread every morning. She fed her sourdough starter, her great-grandmother's starter, kept alive through 3 generations of women who'd survived impossible things. She kneaded dough and shaped loaves and filled the house with the smell of something good and sustaining. Because bread was survival. Bread was sustenance. Bread was proof that you could take simple ingredients and patience and stubborn determination and create something that nourished people. Just like you could take a broken woman with nothing but a trunk and a sourdough starter and turn her into someone who mattered. Someone who built businesses and raised children and loved fiercely and refused to quit even when quitting seemed like the only option. Years later, when Maisie was grown and running her own bakery in Denver, she asked Evelyn about the early days, about Victor, about running, about what made her finally stop. Evelyn thought about it carefully before answering. I stopped running when I realized that safety wasn't the same as being alive. I'd spent 3 years being safe, never staying long enough to matter, never letting anyone close enough to hurt me, never building anything permanent. And I was surviving, but I wasn't living. What changed? Your father, you, this place. Evelyn looked at the starter sitting on the counter, still bubbling, still alive after 4 generations. I realized that some things are worth fighting for even when you're terrified. Some things are worth building even when they might fall apart. And some things are worth loving even when love has hurt you before. Was it hard? Learning to stay instead of run? Hardest thing I've ever done. Still hard some days. I still get that feeling sometimes, that urge to pack a bag and disappear before everything falls apart. But then I remember that I've already survived the worst. Victor was the worst. Running was the worst. Being so scared that I couldn't let myself want anything, that was the worst. And now I'm not scared of wanting things, not scared of building things that matter, not scared of loving people even though love is terrifying. Evelyn smiled. Now I make bread. I love your father. I'm proud of you. And I wake up every morning grateful that I stopped running long enough to let myself have a life. That's beautiful. That's survival. Not the running kind, the building kind. The kind that says I'm here, and I matter, and I'm not disappearing just because the world is hard. Evelyn fed the starter carefully. Your great-great-grandmother kept this starter alive through a war. Your great-grandmother kept it alive through depression. Your grandmother kept it alive through losing her husband. I kept it alive through running across half the country. And now you'll keep it alive through whatever comes next. What if I can't? Then you do your best. You feed it every day. You don't give up even when you want to, and you remember that survival isn't about being perfect or strong or unafraid. It's about showing up every day and doing the work even when the work is hard. Like making bread. Exactly like making bread. Maisie took the starter in her hands, this living thing that connected her to women she'd never met, but whose strength lived in her bones. I'll keep it alive. I know you will, because that's what they did. The women in their family, the women who refused to quit, the women who kept going even when everything told them to stop. They survived, they built, they made bread. And they proved, generation after generation, that the most powerful thing a person could do was choose to keep living even when the world tried to break them. Choose to build even when building seemed impossible. Choose to love even when love was terrifying. Choose to stay even when running felt safer. That was the lesson. That was the truth. That was what made someone powerful. Not wealth or control or the ability to hurt others, but the stubborn refusal to give up on yourself even when everyone else already had. Evelyn had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd run until she couldn't run anymore. She'd survived until survival wasn't enough. And then she'd built something from flour and determination and the kind of love that grew slowly and honestly instead of fast and desperate. She'd become powerful. Not because the world was kind, but because she chose to rise anyway. And that choice, that simple, terrifying, beautiful choice to keep going, changed everything.